Good morning. How are you keeping? We're live here, so we are at the minute, and we've got a quorum, so we have. And if you have any problems with the Starleaf, sure, let us know. And you can mute the microphones until it's time to speak, because background noises will be heard. And if you have any questions, let me know using the WhatsApp facility here. Okay, the meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online, and you're welcome to use the mobile devices so long as they're muted or in airplane mode. The apologies, I think Harry may have sent an apology to say that he will be running late. Yeah, Harry is the only one who sent in apologies. Chairperson's business, I don't have any. And draft minutes. The draft minutes are from the meeting on the 23rd of June, is at page 6. Members okay with the minutes for me to sign them off? Yeah. Okay. Matters arising. Written briefing. There's an environment bill, supplementary legislative consent. I want to refer members to the written briefing from the department in the tabled pack outlining a requirement for legislative consent in respect of 2 specific provisions in the Environment Bill on devolved matters. The committee has previously reported on the legislative consent memorandum relating to the Environment Bill, and further consent is being sought on 2 specific provisions that are largely technical in nature and therefore are considered to be within the scope of the original legislative consent passed by the Assembly on the 30th of June. 2 provisions are: the first one, an insertion within the bill to enable DAERA to issue guidance to the Office for Environmental Protection in respect of matters listed in its enforcement policy, such as whether damage to the natural environment is serious, whether failure to comply with environmental law is serious, and to avoid overlap with respect management of complaints and other public bodies. Second thing is provision to enable DAERA to make regulations on a UK-wide basis to prohibit the use of illegally produced forest risk commodities such as soya, cocoa and palm oil. Under this provision, DAERA will be obligated to consult the local executive before making any such regulation. Members are asked to consider and comment on the additional provisions contained within this legislative consent memorandum in advance of it being considered by the Assembly in September. Do members have any comments or questions in relation to that one there? I should also maybe something I want to suggest myself is we should just check the relation with Culture in the south, because I'm aware of forests such as a Calder forest down in the West Rowan constituency which straddles right into Donegal, so it'd be important that that is aligned across the jurisdiction. So could that be, is that okay? That's sure. Back to the department. Okay, so if you have any other questions relating to that one there, just forward it on to the clerk by the end of play today, please. The next item on the agenda is an oral evidence session on the climate change bill from the Ulster Farmers Union, and I want to refer members to the written briefing from the UFU at page 16. And I want to welcome by Starleaf Victor Chestnut, the President, David Brown, the Deputy President, and Aileen Lawson, the Senior Policy Officer. And I'd like to invite the representatives to brief the committee, and then members will ask questions after that.
Good morning, Declan. Good morning, committee members. Thanks for the opportunity to come in here to give evidence today on which we feel is a very important issue for Northern Ireland's agriculture sector. I'll introduce my team. To my right-hand side here, I have David Brown, who's from that lovely place, Florence Court, that you were talking about, Patsy, we heard that you enjoy coming up and doing the Florence Court area. So that's where David's from. I'm from the north coast, right up near the Giant's Causeway. And Aileen's our environmental policy officer. She's joining from home because unfortunately she has to isolate because of a school child with some positive symptoms. So we're glad to be here today. So I'll move on. Look, about our organisation. We're 11,500 family memberships in the UFU, and these are not just a list of people that agreed to put their name on a page. These are paid up members, so people have skin in the game. Our structure is such that people are democratically elected from every area across Northern Ireland. 2 committees, commodity commodity committees and environment committees that discuss and review the UFU policy. So we have a very democratic structure behind our organisation and indeed behind our policies. About Northern Ireland agri-food sector, and I hope you recognise the dependence in Northern Ireland on that agri-food sector. We have 113,000 jobs was the last figure that the NIFTA report gave us on the jobs in the agri-food industry, with 24,000 farmers. Roughly about the half of those, or about 11,000, underpinning all those jobs. This is worth to Northern Ireland economy 5.2 billion a year. So we're not a forgotten industry or a small industry in Northern Ireland. In fact, we're very important to the financial well-being of our little country, which we all love. Farmers on the front line of climate change impacts. We're particularly vulnerable to extreme weather events, and so we understand more than most that there is a need to address climate change. Therefore, the UFU supports climate change legislation and the need to tackle emissions from agriculture, but proposals must be fair and credible, backed by relevant evidence, and deliver a just transition for everyone. While Northern Ireland must reduce our impact on the climate, we should not reduce our capacity to produce high-quality, affordable food produced to high environmental, animal health and welfare standards. Global demand for food is increasing, and according to the UN forecasts, the number of mouths to feed will rise to nearly 10 billion by 2050. The Climate Change Paris Agreement, while setting ambitious climate change targets, also recognised the importance of safeguarding food security and ending hunger. And I would urge you to remember that that is part of what our responsibility as a nation is. The particular vulnerabilities of food production systems to the adverse impact of climate change. We are farming in a global environment, so we need to take a global view. Agricultural production will need to increase by an estimated 60%, according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, with strong future demand projected for commodities such as milk and meat. Northern Ireland's grass-based livestock production systems are among the lowest greenhouse gas emissions in Europe per unit of production. So, and I want to repeat and force this, it makes sense to produce milk and meat here rather than other areas in the world. Food security will become increasingly important. COVID-19 clearly outlined how sensitive the food supply chain is to global shocks. The Climate Change Committee's third UK Climate Change Risk Assessment Evidence Report in 2021 outlined climate change is likely to exacerbate disruptive events that impact on global agricultural production and food supply chains, including droughts, storms, pests and diseases, with increased risks of disruptions associated with multiple production areas. In light of the increasing risk to food supply chain, and particularly around food imports, removing the ability to locally produced high-quality food is irresponsible in the extreme. For example, Spain at the minute produces a lot of bull beef systems. If the temperature rises, it may become too warm in northern Spain to produce cattle. Water availability in many of these countries is coming under severe pressure. We don't have those issues here in Northern Ireland. The UK is only around 60% self-sufficient on a calorific basis with regard to milk, meat and eggs from domestic livestock production. There continues to be demand for milk and meat and dairy products. Therefore, the UK and Northern Ireland must not achieve its climate change ambitions by exporting production and our greenhouse gas emissions to other countries, commonly known as carbon leakage. It makes no sense to import product from other countries where emissions are higher and standards are lower in order to meet climate change targets. Example, the Australian trade deals, importing product from Australia where the CO2 emissions per person is 22 tonne equivalent, and Northern Ireland were at 10 tonne per person equivalent. For instance, JBS Group, one of the largest protein producers in the world, namely Brazil, have said in a statement that while they target to become net zero, they also are saying that they hope to stop deforestation by 2035. An absolutely horrendous thing to say that they're going to cut trees for another 14 years. Northern Ireland farmers are efficient meat and dairy producers. It's also recognised that beef production in Western Europe is currently 2.5 times more efficient in managing carbon emissions than the global average. They've asked you to take that into account. Dairy farming in Northern Ireland has reduced its carbon intensity by 34% between 1990 and 2017, and greenhouse gas emissions from beef in the UK are 52% lower than the global average. Our soils are in good shape for organic matter, i.e. carbon, because of our livestock density here in Northern Ireland, unlike other areas in the world where soils are becoming depleted and low in carbon, increasing the use of artificial fertiliser. And we hear all the stories, 30 harvests left and all the rest of it. That is not so in Northern Ireland because of our organic matter produced by our livestock. I will not stand back and listen to accusations that Northern Ireland farmers are lagging behind and that we're lacking in ambition when it comes to climate change. Farmers here are proven to be doing a good job when it comes to tackling emissions. Yes, there's a lot more to be done, and we're up for that challenge. We're proud to feed the nation, and we do an excellent job here in Northern Ireland. We can do better, we can learn different ways of doing things. There's always room for improvements. I'll reach over now for David to take you through, and then I'll bring in Aileen, and then I'll summarise before we open it for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, folks, for the opportunity, as the President has said, to come and speak to you today. I guess when we look back at the reasons for the Private Members Bill initially, it was around the absence of a bill being brought forward by, at that time, the DAERA Minister. Thankfully, that's no longer the case. And first of all, I want to maybe address the narrative that the President has just alluded to around Northern Ireland being behind. I suppose the 82%, which the Climate Change Committee came out with by 2050, in that narrative appears to be seen as Northern Ireland doing less than the rest of the UK. But just to make a few points in relation to the UK targets, as the first nation in the world to bring in climate legislation in 2008, we have been part of greenhouse gas implementation programme since 2008, so that work for UFU and the industry here in Northern Ireland has been ongoing. In 2019, Theresa May's government also put forward the first major economy to have a net zero target in law, and the UK is the only country in the world to have developed a pathway to net zero. So an 82% by 2050 here in Northern Ireland as a target is an ambitious target, so much so that it is asking more of our farmers and asking more of this region than we are asking of the rest of the UK or indeed ROI. If I could make just a simple analogy, it has already been alluded to, the fact that I live in Florencecourt in County Fermanagh. I'm 90 miles from our headquarters here in Belfast. So I have further to go. It takes longer and it costs more. So therefore, I think we need to, I suppose, understand in this, that in reality where Northern Ireland is and what is needed of our agriculture sector is a huge, huge ask. If I were to take that analogy further, I might say that the Private Members Bill would be the equivalent of asking everybody to live in Belfast in order to save emissions and just let's rewind the countryside. But please do not think, when the CCC panel came out with their sixth carbon budget back in December, talking about 46% of land in Northern Ireland being released from agricultural production for 150,000 hectares of peatland, of which we have quite a bit in Northern Ireland, being re-wet. In other words, in order to reduce carbon release from that peatland, it would basically become no longer farmable. So those recommendations from the CC committee, which I point out we did come out December of last year and say that we accepted those recommendations do not fundamentally misunderstand the challenge that will be and what it would mean for agriculture here in Northern Ireland. Just to cover off a few points, I mentioned there the Greenhouse Gas Implementation Group. That developed a plan in 2011 around cutting greenhouse gas emissions. The President has already referenced that 34% in the dairy sector and that reduction in the intensity of emissions. And that was part of 4 areas around nutrient management, livestock management, renewable energy and fuel efficiency. All of those, and alongside too, of course, carbon sequestration, more of which I'm sure we'll have later. But most recently, in the business development groups, we've begun through those environmental groups carbon audits. It's very much topical amongst our farmers. It's very much a focus for the agricultural industry. And we're also hopeful, and you may be aware of the recent rollout of a soil health scheme, which will have a carbon element in it. And we would trust that that will be world leading in terms of identifying both the status of our soils and what is needed going forward. UFU works along with the other 4 UK unions, highlighting those positive actions, involvement in COP26 coming up now later in the year. There's been a huge research agenda. We're blessed in Northern Ireland to have AFBI and Queen's University on our doorstep, who are to the forefront in that key research work. However, it is important to understand that the correct legislative framework is needed and to allow that good work to continue. And we believe that the Private Members Bill does not offer that. The Private Members Bill, we believe, should not have been used to bring this legislation forward, because that mechanism would not have been used for other policy issues, and proper scrutiny has not taken place. You'll be aware, obviously, from recent engagement with Lord Delvin, the comments he has made around that in his evidence that it's not achievable, it's not scientifically possible, it's morally wrong and incompatible with the recommendations of his expert working group. And the CCC advice highlighted that even with 50% cut in livestock numbers and a substantial increase in forestry, we could still not hit net zero by 2050. I think there needs to be an understanding that biogenic methane and all of these things, which are natural processes within food production, are not something that can be easily dismissed in the manner which might be available to other sectors. Even DEER officials have pointed to the fact that, with their concerns that only a 0.73% reduction would be delivered by the Private Members Bill, and that would have a massive economic impact on Northern Ireland's agriculture sector and indeed on Northern Ireland's economy. We as an industry have commissioned, and you've heard probably this referenced in the past week or so, independent KPMG consultants to carry out work on an impact assessment, and in due course that will be made available to the ERA committee. While greenhouse gases and emissions from farms can be reduced, it's important to understand that they cannot be eliminated. Cutting livestock numbers and reducing agricultural production in Northern Ireland would not solve what is a global challenge of feeding a growing population. That food, as has already been mentioned, production would be exported elsewhere. The CCC recommended an 82% reduction by 2050. I've already alluded to the fact that that is not an easy option. It is a huge challenge for us as an agricultural sector. Do not believe for one moment, when I was rolled out on radio interviews back in December, that was universally welcomed by our membership. It is a huge challenge to farmers and the agricultural sector. Northern Ireland is the only region to ignore expert advice thus far when proposing a climate change target. And when you have experts such as the internationally renowned CCC clearly spelling out their concerns about the 2045 target, with no credible counter-arguments that we've seen or heard being put forward of how would that, I suppose, engage or instill confidence into the farming community. And our members, as the President has said, has clearly indicated they have no confidence in that recommendation and those who are supporting it, and that is the challenge that we as an organisation have ahead of us.
Thanks, David. I'll bring in Aileen now for some additional points.
Thank you, President, and good morning, committee, and thank you for the invite to have us along. So Victor and David have set out some of the key issues for us, but I'd like to add on some additional points. There are many other aspects to the bill that we feel there's a lack of information on, and that makes it difficult for us to provide you with detailed comments, such as the environmental targets, the additional environmental targets on water quality and so forth. What do they mean? How do they link in with existing legislation? How does that work? How do the reporting requirements tie up with each other? We don't know anything what that means. The carbon usage trackage scheme. Again, there's very little information within the papers presented to date that would give us sort of confidence to report and give you further assessment of what we think that could mean. Another point to make is there's the lack of accountability of the proposed Climate Change Commissioner is very concerning, and the powers that they will have to obtain documents and information seem excessive, and we believe should be removed from this bill. Another point just to add in is that we believe that a Just Transition Commission should be established with powers to ensure there's no negative impacts on specific sectors or communities. This has been successful in Scotland, and our colleagues in NFU Scotland have positive reports about the Commission's work there. Farmers in rural communities should not carry the burden of climate action, and at the minute the private members' bill will result in significant consequences for rural communities and farming families, and we do not believe that it will deliver a just transition. Last week you heard from industry representatives with particular issues around methane and how that should be measured, including the use of GWP star. This needs to be carefully considered and understood as part of your process, and we would encourage you to bring in the experts to discuss this issue. New Zealand have gone down the route of having a separate target for biogenic methane, and there's also been discussions around this in the South, so it may be appropriate here too, given the similarities in our economies. It's also vital that the committee understands the differences between various accounting methods for greenhouse gas emissions. Within the national inventory that is used in the legislative targets, agriculture is measured on its growth emissions. So that's the emissions from livestock, from fertiliser and from farm machinery, things like that. But the role that agriculture plays in sequestering carbon is not attributed to the agriculture inventory. This goes into the land use change inventory and is used to offset all of society's emissions. We'd also just point out that it is possible for some farms to be at net zero, but there's lots of different ways of calculating carbon on farms and doing these calculations. And there's various assumptions and different methodologies can be used to do this, but these are not necessarily comparable to a legislative net zero target. So you need to look at all the detail before you can link any of those things together. So we believe going forward that agriculture needs to be measured on net emissions. So we take account of carbon sequestration, properly recognise it and accurately measure it on farms and attribute it to farmers first. And I'll just hand back to Victor now to sum up.
That's it.
Thanks, Aileen, for that. Yeah, look, I want to pick up on that point of what Aileen said about the sequestration that happens on our farms not being attributed to our outputs or our livestock. And I'll put this in layman's terms. I'm a fairly simple guy. On my own farm, and I'm not different to a lot of farms in Northern Ireland. During my farming career, I've planted about 5 miles of hedges. Those hedges should be used, the sequestration of carbon in those hedges should be used to offset the emissions from my livestock. They are not for sending my neighbour or indeed my local MLA on 2 foreign holidays a year. I know talking to some of you, you didn't want to touch your holidays because you enjoy your holidays. But I'm sorry, I want to offset the emissions on my farm from my livestock first. If there's room left, then society can have it. But first of all, we must be allowed to use the sequestration that happens on our lands with our grasslands and indeed our hedges to offset the emissions from our livestock. It's just completely crazy in my books to consider that as something else. We're the only sector that can work on both sides of the balance of this. Yes, our livestock breed out and create methane, which is broke down in the atmosphere over 12 years. So the argument is that if there's no increase in numbers, then we are not contributing to global warming. But we're the only industry that can not only we have these emissions that we just the fact of life that they're there, but we also can sequestrate, and we can improve our sequestration on our farms. It's an ambition of mine to. My farm was very near the coast and was very bare when I took it over. It's an ambition of mine to have a hedge round every farm. This is some of the low-hanging fruit that we can do. Biodiversity is increasing on my farm. If I were to reduce my stocking rate down in line with this climate change bill, biodiversity on my farm would suffer, undoubtedly. Northern Ireland must reduce our impact on the climate, but we should not reduce our capacity to feed UK consumers with high quality, affordable food produced to high environmental, animal health and welfare standards. The UK and Northern Ireland must not achieve its climate change ambitions by exporting production and our greenhouse gas emissions to other countries. This would have an adverse effect. We would be adding to climate change. The UFU is strongly opposed to a forced reduction in output from the agricultural sector. Food security will become increasingly important in the years ahead and needs to be a key consideration. While this bill is a framework, it will set the policy direction. Otherwise, what is the point of having a target? Therefore, it cannot be looked at in isolation. Ensuring a profitable and productive agricultural sector while reducing emissions is a very challenge, but is an essential task. Northern Ireland agriculture, if appropriately equipped and empowered with the right tools and support, will play a key role in tackling climate change. However, this bill will not allow this to happen. This bill will have an adverse effect on a global scale and may well increase our worldwide problems of climate change. As legislators, you need to be honest. If you want a 2045 as a target, then that will require radical action, such as devastating livestock cuts, but radical action not just by farmers but by all of society. No one has presented any credible evidence to date to show that this drastic approach will not be needed to deliver this target. It's time to turn away from orange and green issues. There's no such thing as an orange cow or a green cow. Take the politics out of this debate and deliver credible legislation for all of Northern Ireland that we all can have confidence and work together to deliver. This bill will have a more detrimental effect to Northern Ireland than any trade deals. Our food produced is of a high quality, high standard and grass fed. Many areas of the world would give the right arm to have our sustainable farming systems. In fact, there was an American speaker over at a cereals conference and he highlighted Northern Ireland's system of farming as being the most sustainable in the world. We've heard quips that the ROI aren't taking this approach. Our counterparts, our farmers in the south, have been outside the door with a cow, you want me gone. The IFA are on the streets. Our farmers will not be found wanting in getting the public's attention. We will not be made scapegoats for society. Net zero 2055 under the current accounting methods is complete nonsense. Thank you.
Thank you. Right here, Victor, David and Aileen, for your very detailed presentation. There's a number of members who want to ask questions, but I suppose I'll sort of kick off here with it. You made reference there to the role of the Commissioner, and I know the challenges before where you have various groups that perhaps aren't accountable, or they're like quangos, and I know the challenges that has caused, and certainly for certainly for farm development and applications. What way do you think that the any climate, whatever climate bill comes about, should be overseen or implemented? How do you think that the department should be held to account for the climate change mitigation and implementing any act that comes about?
I'm going to pass this one over to Aileen to answer that one, please.
Thank you, Declan. Well, I suppose, you've alluded to the fact that we would have had concerns and have shared concerns in the past about shared environmental services and the lack of what would appear to be accountability to any public representatives. So I suppose in terms of a climate change commissioner going forward, we would want to see some sort of public accountability brought into the bill. Now, whether that's to the Assembly, to the Executive or what, I think that's something you need to examine. The Climate Change Committee already does hold each of the devolved administrations and the Westminster Government to account. So effectively there is a degree of accountability already there. But certainly it's something we would encourage you to make sure is included in the bill, given our previous experiences with other organisations. It's something that needs to be developed further and tightened up within these proposals.
And just when you're on the line there, I think it was yourself that mentioned about the Just Transition Commission in Scotland. What shape do you think that would take here? What's the in Scotland? What would be your vision for it being here? What form it would take, who to be accountable to, where would it be located within government, for example, Aileen?
So again, from what I understand, within Scotland it doesn't have any statutory powers at the minute, but that's something that, given the success that it has had, is being re-examined under this new administration in Scotland. But for what I understand about it, it's an independent organisation set up that takes various evidence from various groups and so forth and provides reports then to government. And I think that's something that needs to be considered here. I think what we're hearing from our colleagues in Scotland is that they were very clearly able to spell out their key concerns, like what we're doing today, around the impact of climate change legislation on farmers and on rural communities. And that has helped ensure that those concerns, those genuine concerns, are listened to and included, in various reports before the recommendations, targets and legislation and so forth are needed.
Yeah, and just finally, I think the three of you has mentioned the issue of methane and the fact that New Zealand having a separate target. Is that something that you would think should be considered for here in climate change legislation? You cut off, Aileen? Or David or Victor or whatever?
I think it needs to be looked at, Declan. I think it's something that we don't have any strong opinions on. I think certainly we need to look at the accounting methods, the GWP star, how that links into the inventory. But whether that sits out as a separate target, whether it's a separate target for agriculture, I think all of those things need to be looked at in the round. And it needs a lot further debate and discussion. And I say what we would suggest is that you talk to the experts in the University of Oxford, for example, and you look into this in a lot more detail. But certainly it needs to be considered further. And I think the same is happening south of the border, and certainly New Zealand have that in their legislation as well.
Thank you, Aileen. I'm going to move around the room. Philip?
Yep, thank you. Thanks, Chair. Chair, I actually had three things written down: Just Transition, Climate Commissioner and methane. So, but anyway, I think it's important to point out, as I always do, declare an interest. I'm actually a co-sponsor of the bill, and one of the successes of this bill, in my view, thus far, is that it has been able to attain cross-party and cross-community support. The Ulster Unionist Party, the Green Party, the Alliance Party, the SDLP, and ourselves and Sinn Féin all co-sponsor the bill. So, I was a wee bit disappointed because I haven't heard it in relation to this issue about green and orange politics. I'm not sure anybody has brought green and orange politics into climate change, one of the most important issues that any political party or any politician or legislation face. So it is important that I make that point. You know, my role as a legislator and as co-sponsor is ensuring that we get the best possible bill to ensure that people and businesses and sectors in the North play their part in the most important issue facing us, so that we can hand on a clean, healthy, a sustainable environment to our children. As I said, I had a number of issues down in relation to some of the points have previously been covered. In terms of, I'll not go into the Just Transition and Climate Commissioner because they have been dealt with. In terms of methane, you know, I note in the CC's letter to the Minister Poots on the 1st of April, you know, it said in that letter, in our balanced pathway, methane emissions in the North fall by 42% from 2020 to 2050. So, I mean, I'm just wondering what the Ulster Farmers Union's view of that target. I mean, because you mentioned that you need a target. So, the CCC have suggested a target of 42% with regard to methane. So, I'm just interested to hear the Ulster Farmers' view of that potential target.
Yeah, thanks. Look, we have this different way of measuring it. At the minute, we're measuring by GWP 100, which is global warming potential, and agriculture is seen as 28 on that scale. GWP star mentions the global warming potential taken into account the lifetime of that gas. And as I've said, that while methane is a potent gas, it breaks down in 12 years. So in effect, if we could move to that, that means that unless there's an increase in livestock numbers in Northern Ireland, and I would just take this point to tackle some of the very, very uninformed ideas of some of your bill sponsors in thinking that livestock numbers have increased. Livestock numbers in Northern Ireland peaked in 1998 in the cattle world. I'll bring David in to give me the figures just exactly on that, David.
Yeah, well, I suppose we're aware of that conversation around, you know, intensification and I suppose those emotive words. But I mean, in terms of breeding suckler cows, and I took it from the 1990 baseline off the back of the fact that that's obviously where this whole climate change discussion was. 268, almost 269,000 suckler cows, beef cows, breeding cows. That is at 247,000 last year. Admittedly, dairy cows have increased to counterbalance that. Breeding sheep, 1.367 million, down to 938,000 over that 30-year period. And breeding sows, obviously on the beef side, from 78,000 down 40% to 47,500. You know, all of those, and the other point to make, I suppose, in relation to intensification, which seems to be pointed towards the pigs and poultry sector, is that they are very, very small contributors to the greenhouse gas emissions. Maybe just picking up on the point around methane, and I know, Chair, that Declan, that I have made this point to you in the past. I mean, we would very much wish that the committee would hear this information and have it explained firsthand, because while we have been on numerous webinars and so forth and listened to these speakers, you know, explain to us the accounting methodology, I think it would be a benefit to the committee to invite, and we're very happy to share some of the names of the people involved in this, the scientists, and they are the experts, you know, that have brought forward those accounting methods which they believe are a more accurate reflection of how agriculture and, I suppose, wider methane should be measured.
Thanks for that, David. Just to come back to your point on targets and, you know, how are we going to achieve this and how are we going to achieve this? You know, we do hope that there will be technologies come forward that will help us achieve this. But at the minute, they're not there yet. And that's why we're opposed to putting too many targets that we can't meet. But, you know, there's a lot of work on seaweed. Let's hope it bears fruit. Initially, it looks encouraging. You know, incorporating a small amount of seaweed into our diets, they are saying reduces methane output by up to 85%. If it's anything close to that, there will be an industry develop doing that. But at the minute, we're in early days. But we have AFBI, which is world leading, and I repeat, world leading in their expert measurement of this, measurement of methane, measurement, and indeed Northern Ireland is and I not just picking a figure, is world leading in its research to that. And we hope that there will be measures that we can use within our livestock production that can reduce this. But at the minute, to base something just in a hope factor, we feel it's very dangerous. But we do hope that there will be measures going. We are learning, farmers are always learning. We are learning a bit more about our soils. And one of the things I see around the world is there's other areas bringing back livestock to help the carbon intensity in our soils and our organic matter in the soils. And isn't it ironic here in Northern Ireland, where we're looked at by the rest of the world of having that we're trying to reduce it? It doesn't make sense at all. We need to move slowly on this. Otherwise, we could get an adverse effect.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks, Victor. Right, I'm going to move round. John Blair.
Chair, thank you, and apologies that I lost connection there for a while, so I hope I'm not repeating anything here that may already have been covered. But I'll fire through a couple of things quickly, and please, as I say, correct me if someone else has asked. First thing is the carbon sequestration and the fact that we've discussed before with the Farmers Union, and I thank them for the presentation today. The issue of not all information being captured currently for the maximum benefit to farmers, and if any progress has been made in that regard in their discussions with government, is the basis of the question, and I think we should express here we'll all of us be supportive to try and achieve that going forward. The second question is the issue of the Climate Change Commissioner. I mean, many of us accept that the current position, despite an outstanding commitment to an independent environmental protection agency, is that there's a situation of the government department policing the government department and rules and regulations being implemented, and many of us find that an unsatisfactory position. So is the Farmers Union able to present an alternative to that Climate Change Commissioner in ensuring that regulatory control will be implemented impartially?
Thanks. I'll bring Aileen in on the last point, and then I'll go to David there for the first part of that question.
Yeah, in relation to the carbon sequestration, John, I mean, it is something that we have been raising, obviously, at governmental level, but in reality, in terms of the government inventories and the calculations they do, as the President alluded earlier, neither our hedges or our grasslands or indeed, woodland, yes, if it's new woodland being planted, is now being accounted in terms of those carbon audits. But in reality, that is a battle we're fighting in order to get that recognition, because when it comes to, for example, the comparison, and I know it has been made in the past with the NFU position around 2040, they have taken that position of 2040 off the back of saying, well, first and foremost, going back to my earlier point, they have not got the level of emissions to the livestock that Northern Ireland has. But on the other side of that, they are taking into account what has been sequestered in that equation. We, unfortunately, are not allowed, as I say, under current government inventories, to balance that out. On the point that the President made earlier about the hedges that he's planted being allocated to the wider benefit of society is something I'd say, I suppose, in fairness, probably seen as being unfair to the farmer who has livestock, where those emissions are all being added, totaled and calculated, and yet in terms of the sequestration, we want to see that calculated. We want to see further progress on the ability to have that measurement for each of our farms. But at present, we have not got any advancement, I would have to say, in terms of the government to recognise that.
Okay. But David, sorry to come in on that, but what you're saying basically is the position I already hold, that individual auditing of that would be beneficial to farmers who are making the greater effort, basically.
Well, yes, and indeed not just to the individual farmer, but to the whole of the agricultural industry. Yeah. Obviously, if we have two sides of an equation, one is not negating entirely, but certainly reducing. The level of emissions would be balanced against the level of sequestration, and that is currently not happening.
Okay, thank you for that.
I know the first part of that question, Joan, has been covered, but I'll ask Aileen just to briefly comment on the Climate Change Commissioner.
I think, John, we haven't said that we're opposed to a Climate Change Commissioner. I think what we're saying is that the level of accountability needs to be looked at carefully to make sure that there is there is accountability to public representatives. So I mean, we've no strong views on the role of the commissioner in itself. It's just that accountability position that we would have more concerns around. But how that links in with the Climate Change Committee, is there an overlap? You know, all of these things have to be teased out, and there's not enough information in the public domain that I'm aware of that explains that to us. So I think those are the questions maybe we need to ask of you and your supporters of the bill, is to look to maybe explain that further to us. Is it what way you envisage the Climate Change Committee linking in with other organisations, with the likes of your own, you know, the committee itself, who that reports to, and so forth. So it's all of that. It's hard to provide comment when there's not a lot of information there at the minute. And also the powers, I mean, under the current bill, they have powers to obtain information from anybody that receives public money, for example. That could be farmers. You know, what information will the Climate Change Committee be able to get? Is the Climate Change Commissioner going to be coming onto a farm and demanding records, for example? Again, we would like to see clarification around that, and I haven't been able to find that within any text that's available at the minute.
Okay, so you're looking clarification on the structures around the commissioner, but not necessarily opposed to the idea of a commission?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Patsy?
Just on there now. Good to see everybody. And thank you for coming along and giving us your valuable time and help there. Now, just one of the things, leading on from what Aileen, we're exploring this issue of the commissioner. Do you see that in terms of the accountability chain that there should be to the Climate Change Committee by way of reporting mechanism, or you've given it a bit of thought? It's only just now that you've stimulated that type of conversation.
I don't think we have given it a lot of thought, Patsy, simply because there's not a lot of information within the, you know, so when we've looked at this as an organisation, well, it's probably raised more questions than it has given us answers. So I think we would ask you all, you know, as part of your scrutiny process, to maybe delve into that a lot more. We would have a lot of concerns about the powers that the bill currently would give to a climate change commissioner, about the ability to seize information and obtain information and things like that. So I think we would encourage you maybe to go back and look at that and see whether that's suitable. But we are raising our concerns, I think, would be what I would like to highlight.
Okay, and that's grand. Just working through a number of issues here. Maybe to come back to Victor there about MLAs jetting off on holidays. He might need to have a word with his local MP about that one more particularly. But anyway, we'll move on to the level of emissions. And Victor, I think it was you said that the level of emissions in the world per unit of production, that in the north here we were a lot less. Now, can you advise me just what that's based on, or where, back to the facts and the science and the calculations of where that conclusion came from, because I think that'll be very helpful to the committee.
Yeah, the figure is really a figure for Western Europe, Patsy, so it's not maybe just Northern Ireland. In effect, this Western Europe figure is producers per kilo of beef is 52% of beef produced in the rest of the world. That's the figure that's used. There's no us to come up with that figure. David, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of emissions, and I suppose the comparison, Patsy, was also made with Brazil, where it's 4.5 times the emissions of what is produced in the UK or indeed in Ireland. But that figure is an internationally recognised figure that in Western Europe we are 2.5 times less than the global average. So those are not UFU figures, if you understand. I suppose just... All
right, no, I get that. I was just wondering where the science, where those figures were coming from. But it's not making a case specifically for Northern Ireland. And there are other countries within the EU who are probably at stages of advancement around climate change measures too. So the similar argument would be made by similar representative agriculture and farming groups right across the whole of the EU, I presume then. No, that's grand.
Sorry, Patsy, if I could just take a moment maybe to proceed, to come on from that. I mean, like in reality, and I said this at the start, in terms of the position that the UK has taken and providing that pathway, it is the only country in the world at this stage that has done that. And I know there's a bit of a a narrative again around, comparing the North here with our friends in the Republic of Ireland. But in reality, they have not as yet, and I think this needs to be understood, they have not as yet got to the point where they have those detailed calculations or investigations, or indeed, I suppose the message coming out from Teagasc about the pathway that they're talking about is indicating a very modest reduction, around 15% has been talked about in the agricultural sector, and that they would allow then other sectors to carry the weight of that target. So we're in a different place in terms of that comparison.
Yes. That's grand. Now, then, around the sequestration measures and carbon audits and stuff like that, what do you feel those would be a hindrance or a problem, or how do you see that as being, if you like, rolled out?
Yeah, on a farm basis, Patsy, on a farm basis, I've had a carbon audit done, but what grates me is the sequestration of my grasslands or the sequestration of my hedges aren't counted. The few areas of trees I've planted around the farm are counted, but my hedges are counted, and I can't get my head around that. What's the difference in planting half an acre of trees or growing half an acre length, and linear hedges? It doesn't make sense at all, and it's just completely unfair. To me, I'm quite happy to reach over to society any sequestration or any reduction in carbon that I don't need after my lifestyle emissions are covered, but not before that. So, I just think there's a fundamental problem here in accounting on carbon. I was almost not going to do the carbon audit until they sorted that problem out, because I said, right, what's the point of counting one side of the balance and not adequately counting everything that's goes on within the farm gate?
No, I get that, and I appreciate all the work you've done around hedge planting there. Just as throwing a wee tricky thing in, what about the landowner that marches you? Does that be taken into account as his or yours, or?
Oh, you mean the March hedge?
Yes.
50-50.
50-50. Okay. No, that's grand. Now, to get back to the other issue then, do you see New Zealand as being a helpful or a useful project that should be lifted or could be lifted for us in the north here? The way of the measurement levels and the sort of, if you like, the exception or added, if you like, estimation that has been given to agricultural produce and agri-food sector in terms of the measurements there. Do you feel that that's a route that is preferable or useful, or?
Yeah, well, look, carbon is one thing in a whole series of challenges we face. It's biodiversity, it's, the environment in a lot bigger way. And I just looked at an article there that was sent through from The Guardian there on the 29th of June of 2021. Eat this to save the world. And the top thing on that sustainable foods, it says from wheat to venison, but the top thing, grass-fed beef and lamb are right at the top of that equation. And grass-fed beef and lamb is basically, and food and milk, is basically what Northern Ireland farm is based on. Farming is based on.
Yes.
On the New Zealand system, where they treat methane separately, yeah, probably we would look at that. I want to bring Aileen in just to see your views on that. But yeah, I think it probably would be an advantage. I do think that we need to listen to the Oxford University professors and examine this GWP star instead of the GWP. Aileen?
I think, it is something. New Zealand would have a similar structure to yourselves here, and indeed in the south of Ireland, so it is something that needs to be considered. But what I would say is, regardless of how you have the targets, it's still very hard. It's still going to be very hard, and we're hearing real concerns from farmers in New Zealand as well about their struggles in meeting their climate change target. We're hearing about livestock reductions. We're seeing over there land being bought up for forestry, rural communities and rural people displaced as jobs and farms disappear. So whatever way the targets are set, let's have to be honest, they are going to be very difficult, regardless, for farmers to achieve. And that's why it's so important to get them right and to spend time making sure that those targets are correct and fair for farmers and rural communities in Northern Ireland.
Just on that point, Aileen, I take it that in regard to New Zealand, it's not a new factor for big intensive farming units to be set up and, if you like, the small person being displaced.
I mean, Patsy, I can't comment on the detail of what's happening in New Zealand, but certainly that's something we would have concerns of here. And I mean, again, I mean, you have to consider the perverse outcomes of aspirations to hit climate targets and so forth. But also, I mean, I'll also give you an example closer to home. We're hearing, because every organisation now wants to be seen to be doing something on climate change, so we're hearing of corporates in London buying land in Wales to put into trees. Again, displacing farms. Farmers have rented that land for years, being put off the land, and then that's having an impact. Our colleagues in NFU Wales are looking into putting together a paper on this, because what they're saying is farmers in those areas tend to be the Welsh speakers, have linked closely to the traditional Welsh culture, and that's being lost, and they're starting to see that already. So, we need to think carefully about all the implications that climate change legislation can have, and that's why it's important to take the time to look at expert advice that is relative to this region, and think carefully before you set targets that could cause very, very damaging consequences for the rural community.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Aileen.
Can I just come in there, Patsy, on you're exactly right, the herd sizes are getting bigger, and that is because they have so much housing that comes along a winter. Some of the areas where they would winter their cows on are wintered outside, and there's quite a lot of soil damage been done, and water quality is one of the big issues that is facing farmers in New Zealand. But look, the family farm structure in Northern Ireland, I think, has a lot to offer. We are minute in terms of the rest of the world. When you go to Australia, we're about 30,000, 50,000 beef lots. You just simply do not get that in the UK. But there is an increasing amount of small farms disappearing, and our farm sizes are getting bigger. And we need to watch and not push this to the extent either for efficiency, for carbon or something to the detriment of our rural economies. Yeah, we were hearing from Wales, and one of the things that they were so worried about was these corporates and the effect of these rural communities where their Welsh language was in danger of being lost out as regards this. So, everything has other areas that affect that you wouldn't initially think about, but we need to go carefully on this one.
Okay, thanks very much, Victor. Thank you.
Thank you, Patsy. And Victor, I'm going to move around on to Claire.
Thanks very much, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Great. Listen, thank you very much for that. And there was a comment made at the start there that I think mentioning that you're angry or you get upset when you hear that Northern Ireland farmers are accused of lagging behind. And I couldn't agree with you more on that one. In my opinion, I think they're being held back. And I think that example that you give about, carbon sequestration isn't even being accounted for in terms of what's being sequestered from planting hedges and stuff. We just don't have that body of evidence and that research. And I think that's a fundamental flaw as a starting point. But you also started there by giving us your membership numbers. I think it was 11,000 numbers, or 11,000 farmers, I think you said, that you had as members. Does the UFU have any corporate membership?
Yes, Claire, we have 11,500 farm family memberships. And that, my own farm's typical. I farm with a farm business. My wife works in the farm business, and my son has a farm business as well. We have one UFU membership. We did a survey in some of our groups, and it was 2.6 members per membership. So we have 11,500 farm and family members. Yeah, because of the structure of Northern Ireland farming closing and our number of farmers are going down every year, and we are a membership organisation, we get our funds from our members, and that's why I said at the start we were committed. Some of these organisations, when I've asked them, do you want to become a member, just say, give us your name and that's all we need. To me, that doesn't deliver very much commitment to a cause if there's no cost. But what I'm saying is, yeah, because of our farm, of the pool that we're taking our memberships out of decreasing all the time, we had to look at other ways of trying to get membership. So we have corporate members, but having these corporate memberships, they were very clearly told, this doesn't preclude the UFU lobbying against any practices they do. They are there to recognise that their businesses depend on farmers and farmers doing well, and their corporate membership shows that because of the lobbying of Northern Ireland UFU, that keeps farmers farming, so therefore keeps their businesses going. So, for instance, we can have a corporate member as a meat plant, and we can publicly go out and slag them for something that we think is malpractice as far as our farmers. And they're very clearly told that when they join up as corporate members.
That's great, thank you. And listen, it's been covered as well, but the concerns that you raise about the powers of the Climate Commissioner. I just want to point out for the record as well that, in terms of accountability, it's the Northern Ireland Assembly that would be appointing the Commissioner. So I think that accountability level is definitely there, and the powers given in the bill to the Climate Commissioner is based on exactly the same as other existing Northern Ireland Commissioners. And of course, then within this bill, the Commissioner has absolutely no enforcement powers at all. And there was also mention then about concerns about Northern Ireland moving beyond the recommendations of the CCC when no one else in the UK are. And again, just want to point out for the record that other GP regions have moved beyond what the CCC did recommend as their targets as well, and are setting their own net zero targets in primary legislation. But also under the CCC's balanced pathway, the scenario given, methane emissions in Northern Ireland would fall by 42% from 2020, so it's last year, to 2050. And that's even lower than the New Zealand split target for methane, which is 24 to 47% by 2050. And that's proven quite disastrous for New Zealand's biodiversity and also for their non-dairy farmers. Like the CCC do not support the idea of a split target, would you?
Yeah, I'm going to go over to Aileen to answer the middle part of that question, at least, and then we'll come on. Yeah.
I think firstly pick up, Claire, that you said that other regions have not followed climate change advice in terms of their targets, but they have followed a Climate Change Commission pathway, is my understanding. So their targets that they've selected are the maybe more extreme or different routes in the pathway. They're still part of the climate change overall advice. In terms of a split target for methane, I think what we've clearly said is we need to look into this further. We haven't taken a firm policy position within our organisation. Our position was that we need to initially follow the Climate Change Committee advice in determining targets for Northern Ireland. If you're choosing to go down a different route, then we need to look at and not following that advice in the setting of the private members bill target, then we need to look at methane separately. And as an organisation, we need to sit down and go through that carefully. But what we're saying is we suggest that you bring in the experts and have that discussion. We'll listen into that. We'll take all that information together and we'll come back to you, I think, with a position on it. But at the minute, it certainly needs to be considered as an option, which is an alternative to what's sitting in the private members bill at the minute.
Okay, so at the minute you have no position on split targets then?
I think what we're saying is we're still open to looking at that. We have no firm view on it, but it needs to be considered if we're continuing to go down the line of a private members bill target of 2045.
Okay. And if we were looking at something else, you would be in favour? Sorry, I'm getting a bit confused.
If we're looking at sticking with the 82% by 2050, I think we're happy enough to stick to it as it stands.
Without split target?
Without a separate target.
Okay, listen, are you aware of the Farm Zero C project in the Republic of Ireland? It's a project that intends for 5,000 dairy farms to have zero carbon emissions within the next 5 years. And it's just received a €2 million prize for scientific innovation. And I'm just wondering, have you had any communications or targets, or are you aware of the work that's going on there?
I maybe come in there not entirely aware of it because it's fairly recent, Claire, but what I can say is we have a similar project in Northern Ireland called Arc Zero, which is much further on than what it is in the south of Ireland, but it has it's only involving a small number of farms. The other thing that I would say is the soil scheme that the Minister is bringing forward with the carbon element will take us far further ahead than anything they're doing in the south of Ireland in terms of the baseline measurements that we will have on carbon on farms. And in fact, what I'm hearing is that there is nothing else like it anywhere else in the world. So we have the potential to be a world leader in this region in terms of our measurement and our baseline data on farms in Northern Ireland. What that doesn't mean is that it'll make it any easier for us to hit a net zero target by 2045, but it does mean that we'll have sound information on what to base, base decisions on. But certainly, even with that, even with all the known science and technologies and mitigation measures that are on the ground, it will still be almost impossible. Well, it will be impossible to hit net zero by 2045 without drastic livestock cuts in Northern Ireland. So we can do all these positive things, but we need the right legislative framework, we need the right time and the right space to allow us to get there and to start us on a journey. At the minute, the way things are looking, there's almost no point in doing that work because we just cannot deliver what you're wanting us to do within the time space that has been given.
Listen, it's great to hear that work's being done because those baselines are absolutely fundamental, and that's exactly the type of the lack of having that is exactly what is holding many sectors, including your own, back. But my last question, I suppose, before Chair, if you could allow me, is I would love to know, do you have any concerns about the ability of the Northern Ireland agri-food sector to compete at an international level if we should fail to reach net zero, especially when other jurisdictions, GB and ROI, are moving forward with really high levels of climate ambition, and we know that global food corporations are committing themselves to being net zero, not just in their operations but also in their supply chains?
Yeah, I'll reach that one over to David, but the short answer is no, because we're ahead in many instances. But David?
Yeah, I suppose I'll go back, Claire, to perhaps the comparison I made earlier when Patsy was asking a question about that discussion about the different place. As I said at the outset, UK has been part of basically we've had that net zero pathway for quite a number of years, and I mean, in reality, well, we take, for example, the Republic of Ireland. For the past 13 years, the UK has been on that pathway since 2008. And in reality, it has not been an issue or a disadvantage to ROI in the past 13 years. And I think the difficulty we have is that the comparison that perhaps has been made is the aspirational wishes. And I mean, at the end of the day, I fully appreciate, campaigns are well and good, and obviously, a lot of countries, not just in the south of Ireland, but a lot of countries are saying about what they want to do and what they would like to do, but they have not been costed out, or they have not identified a pathway to delivering those objectives, which the UK has done. So I have no fear whatsoever, because in reality, where Northern Ireland is being asked to go by the CCC panel is much ahead of what has been asked of agriculture in ROI at present.
Can I just come in on the corporate point? There are lots of corporates making lots of, proposals to hit net zero and so forth. Look at the small print. That is not comparable to overall legislative target. They're looking at maybe things within their own, their very small, narrow agenda within their own businesses and so forth. So you need to look at the detail of what those are doing. Are they offsetting emissions in countries overseas? Are they buying up farmland and displacing farmers in Wales, as I spoke about earlier? So it's not just as simple, and it's not comparable to a legislative target either. So you need to look at all the detail underneath those corporate actions as well.
Yeah, we have heard of corporates buying up land for forestation in India. Well, now, to me, that if that's how you achieve it, to me, that's crazy.
Okay. I'm taking over the chair just for a few brief moments. So, Rosemary, you're next.
Thank you, and thank you, Aileen, Victor and David, for your presentation this morning there. I want to just query something. I think perhaps maybe, Aileen, you're best placed to answer this. It's in relation to comments. I think there's a little bit of confusion out there. We had comments from the National NFU in relation to perhaps climate carbon zero can be reached by 2040. Can you, and we're talking about, obviously in the bill we speak of, we're talking about carbon zero by 2045. CCC is talking about 2050 with 82% carbon zero here in Northern Ireland. So I'm wondering if you could give me a wee bit of an explanation about the 2040 date and timeline that the NFU spoke about.
Okay, thanks, Rosemary. I mean, the NFU have set themselves an aspirational target for their farms for a net zero. So it's aspirational. It's not a legislative requirement. It's not any sort of a requirement. But it's based on measuring net emissions on farms. So it's back to this difference between gross emissions and net emissions. So in the national inventory, agriculture is measured on its gross emissions, and that's where the legislative targets come in. The NFU are looking at measuring emissions produced and then offsetting that against the carbon on in your hedges and your grasses and so on that Victor has talked about, and also renewable energy. That's not how the national inventory and legislative targets work, so you can't compare the two things. They're completely different. The other thing I would say is that the NFU are very aware of our situation here in Northern Ireland and are very supportive of our position and are concerned about the direction of travel here, particularly in relation to livestock numbers. So a key point that all of the UK farming unions have in common is that we all are very much of opinion that you should not reduce the ability to feed UK consumers from high quality, locally produced food, so that we do not support livestock cuts to meet climate change targets to the extent that we're talking about. One thing I would say is that we do share in common with the NFU, because their objectives and how they would deliver their aspirations are a three-pronged approach. So what they want to do is improve productivity, increase carbon sequestration on farms, and also bring in renewable electricity production and bioeconomy measures and so forth. Those are identical to what UFU have been supporting through the Greenhouse Gas Implementation Partnership. We have been on that journey, and in fact what I would say is where we are going to, the soil health scheme and so forth that we're proposing and the Minister's developing will actually probably take us ahead of NFU in terms of having a baseline and having actions on farms. So NFU, yes, they have that target in place. Point to make, it's not comparable with the legislation target, and also the pathway and how they're hoping to achieve that target. We are very much ready on that same page and doing similar actions.
If I could just very quickly add, Rosemary, I mean, just on the point that Aileen has raised around renewable energies, which is probably not well known, and I have to admit possibly not well known even among our agricultural industry, but renewable energy, on-farm renewable energy in Northern Ireland is providing the energy for 150,000 homes. So that renewable energy piece in Northern Ireland is very much part of our farming infrastructure. It's not on every farm, obviously, but we have obviously got wind turbines, we have AD plants, we have all of the different means by which energy can be generated. And just to note that 150,000 homes in Northern Ireland are already being supplied with energy from our farms.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you, Aileen, for that. Just one other, another question I want to speak in relation to. The private members bill we look at talks about carbon zero by 2045. Then we have had the CCC documentation, which talks about 82% carbon zero by 2050. Could you explain? Can you explain why the United Kingdom will be reaching carbon zero actually by 2050, but Northern Ireland is only reaching it at 82%?
Yeah, thanks. I'll start with that, Rosemary, and hello again.
A lot of misunderstanding out there, and that's why I'm asking.
Northern Ireland produce a lot of food for the UK. We feed 10 million. Most of that it's consumers in the UK. So the Climate Change Commission looked at that, and they took that into account. So the UK reaching net zero by 2050 is including Northern Ireland. But it's the same as on a farm-to-farm basis. One farm may be able to sequestrate more and help out the next door farmer. So because of the Highland probably of Scotland and because of the less intensive livestock region within other areas of the UK, they're saying, okay, we can't put those targets in Northern Ireland because we need them to produce the beef and the milk basically and the sheep in Northern Ireland. So that is why the 82% figure was given for Northern Ireland. But the same as we did it on Northern Ireland on a farm-to-farm basis, one farmer may be reducing his to 82% and another farmer may be doing 120%. So that overall we can reach net zero by 2050. So we shouldn't be put ourselves down in Northern Ireland. We are reaching net zero as a UK by 2050. It's just the accountancy divisions within that. There will be areas in southwest Scotland that will be over 80 or less than 82%. There'll be areas in the north of Scotland, for instance, that will be well over 100% simply for the intensity of livestock. So it's no different in Northern Ireland when you take it on a UK basis.
Okay, thank you. And the last question I want to ask is on the carbon, on these carbon audits. I don't know if you read the Irish Farmers Journal, but you'll notice a week ago there was an investigation into soils on a farm in Tullamore, and the amount of difference in the different fields within the farm was very, very interesting. And I'm wondering, would you be advocating a policy for individual farms to have an audit carried out in relation, because there's such a difference and variance within the farms?
I'll start now and reach it over to David. And again, thanks for that question. Yeah, look, technology is increasing all the time. For instance, now our arable guys, when the combine goes down the field, it maps the yield. When they're spreading fertiliser or indeed slurries, there's a monitoring equipment on that slurry, so that the areas of the field that need more nutrients get a variable rate of nutrients according to the yield of the crop before. Those will come in. We're now looking at Greenmount has purchased, for instance, a system for their slurries where they will be able to spread a field, and there'll be a higher rate going on in some areas of the field that need it to other areas. That's all the new technology that's coming in, and that will increase our carbon storage on our lands. But one thing I was touching on in my presentation was how good our soils are with that carbon. And I've read a book of sustainable farming in America, and they're bringing back livestock into those dust bowls. That's what happened. They cleared the livestock away, and now they're suffering. Their organic matter suffering. They're having to grow their crops purely with artificial fertiliser. The soil health and the microbes and all are being killed by that artificial. And like worm counts is a big thing now in Northern Ireland farms. Soil samples is a big thing. And we are increasing that. And this project for our soils will include LiDAR, which identifies areas where we may have run off. So technology is increasing. I hope you, if you get nothing else out of today, you can know that Northern Ireland agriculture is stepping up to the plate. We're heading in this direction, and we are responsible. We're not burying our heads in the sand, not tackling these issues. David, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just specific to the carbon audits, Rosemary. In fact, I think just to make clear, obviously we have as well, and I'm sure it's in front of your committee, and indeed we have sent on some of the papers of the work that our different sectors have done with the Anderson Centre, independent consultants, in terms of looking at future agricultural support. All of those, whether it was the beef, sheep sector or dairy or indeed the Ireland sector, all of them have recognised that in terms of future agricultural support, there will be an element, and indeed a great element of it, around delivering outcomes. Those outcomes, we're not blind to the fact that those outcomes will be about reducing our emissions and indeed the carbon sequestration. So those carbon audits are very much part of what the UFU has, I suppose, suggested as being part of that. So I don't think in terms of our farms that there is any fear around carbon audits. It's something that we're recommending to DAERA in terms of future support, that is a mechanism by which we can determine, I suppose, the level of sequestration, the level of emissions on individual farms. But just also to point out, and this is something that we've brought to the attention even of the Climate Change Committee, work that has been ongoing, and the President has alluded to the work around manures. AFBI have had trials down there at Hillsborough for 50 odd years in relation to, I suppose I'll describe it bluntly as a slurry project, a manure project. But in truth, they have been then, as part of that, which has proven to be of great benefit to us, have been measuring the level of carbon in the soil. So they have that historical data, which has shown that they are able to sequester and increase the level of carbon in the soils over that time period. And that's something which the CCC were unaware of. They believed that soils reached a point where they were saturated and could take on no more carbon. The work at AFBI would seem to indicate otherwise, and that's something we've drawn to the attention of the CCC panel. But just in conclusion, no fear of carbon audits.
No. Thank you.
Thanks. To add to that, like, we as farmers, we're developing new technologies. For instance, we used to go out to the field to spread our spray. We used to blow it up into the air, which caused a lot of air contamination. And we're moving on a period, on a trajectory to do away with that completely. Some areas of the country will be well over 50% now spread by low emission spreading, which means that nutrient's not been lost in the air. If you smell that flying by a field, that's nutrients been lost. It's a loss to the farmer, it's a loss to everything. So we are on that trajectory by 2025 to have all farms spreading by low emission. So it just shows, give us the time scale, give us the tools, and we will get there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
William, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and can I thank Victor, David and Aileen for their presentation. Can I declare an interest in a farmer, partner in a farm business, and also a member of the UFU? For me, I'm disappointed that there are still members of this committee wedded to the Private Members Bill against all the expert advice from the Climate Change Committee right down to the industry. For me, we have made it clear that, and for me, I believe it's very important that we, in any scenario, we listen to the expert advice. Last week we had Colin Donnelly on from the Northern Ireland Meat Exporters Association. He said that the private members' bill could possibly reduce livestock numbers in Northern Ireland up to 80%. That's up to 80%, but that could be a massive impact on our local farmers. But not only that, 100,000 jobs are depending in the agri-food sector. So has any work been done within the union to look at the possible job losses that could be created due to the possible going ahead with this private members bill?
Yes, William. That we have commissioned that work with the KPMG, and those figures, and indeed they're even more stark than what you come at. And those interim figures from the KPMG and their initial look at the thing, and I must qualify that this is just first looking at the figures, but they reckon that to comply with the private members bill, we could be looking at up to 85% reduction in livestock numbers in Northern Ireland. Now, make no mistake, this would wipe Northern Ireland industry out, wipe out completely. You have to find 5.2 more billion for the economy, and you have to look for the guts of 113,000 jobs in the economy. Make no mistake what this would do to Northern Ireland. This is completely ludicrous to continue down this road without taking a bit of respect to that. That is not us coming up with those figures. That is not scaremongering by the UFU. This is KPMG, a reputable company asked to look at this, and this is the figures they come back. Shocked us, and I hope it continues to. It will also shock you to realise that we need to take this in a more sustainable approach forward. Otherwise, we will wipe out our industry. David wants to come
Yeah, I just want to add to that, William. You've asked about the job losses, and I suppose I don't know the detail, but I'm sure Mike Johnson from the Dairy Council probably has alluded, perhaps. So my apologies if I'm repeating, but he may have told you last week. But in reality, if you consider in the milk sector, which I know you're involved in yourself, if we talk about 15% of the milk going to the liquid market, in effect, what this would do to the dairy sector would basically mean we don't need processed, we don't need cheeses, we don't need all of the different products that are manufactured and made from milk. We wouldn't have the milk. So in terms of the job losses, it's hard for us to quantify. I think the processing and the industry are better able perhaps to quantify what potential there is for job losses. But in reality, it would be pretty stark if we were to face reductions on the levels that have been indicated.
Can I just add in there as well, just to highlight that those the impact will be concentrated on our ruminant industry, so our beef, our milk, and our sheep, as opposed to pig and poultry. The vast over 90% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the livestock sector come from ruminants, just because of biology. So those are the sectors who will be hardest hit by this, by the consequences of this legislation going forward.
Yeah, look, if we spin this forward, our rural communities will die. Our countryside will be no longer pretty for our tourists. We will end up with wildernesses. Is that really what you as MLAs want? I would urge you to consider carefully the starkness of this, coming from this 85%. Nothing's more crazy in all my life. An industry that's been built up over the years, Northern Ireland, that farming has kept Northern Ireland on its feet, it's kept going. And we have that younger farmer there keen to develop and keen to grow our industry. And we have to do it sustainably. I want to pass my farm on to my son, and hopefully it will go on for generations. We've been there for many generations. This is not about, ripping the backside out of our farms and not having sustainable farms going forward. This is about feeding the world. The fact of the matter that if that went ahead and we reduced our ruminant sector by 85%, the first place to be hurt would be our house. That would be completely adverse to another private member's bill for LFEs. There's no point of doing that. There's no point of supporting a private member's bill for LFEs and supporting this climate bill. The two are incompatible. We would decimate Northern Ireland as an industry, and indeed we would aid climate change. We would be pushing the thing the wrong way, because what are we going to do in the UK? The UK is going to import that food from other areas in the world, and as we heard, we can produce it here at 52%, that red meat industry at 52% of the carbon of the rest of the world. So you're really going to say that it's sensible to cut that production out here in Northern Ireland to reach a self-imposed target that is not agreed by the scientists, and yet import it from another area of the world with 2.5 times more carbon footprint to increase the problem we have with climate change.
Victor, I will let you come back in. I'm sorry for interjecting, but I do believe that it's important that we have some balance. I mean, we appreciate you giving your evidence, and it's been very useful and will be very useful to the committee. And I understand that this is a very emotional subject, but I mean, I have to pull you up for using words such as decimate rural communities and killing the industry. There's none of that in this bill. And we're talking to you as representatives of Ulster Farmers Union, and I know that a lot of this bill has been dialed down to the impact on, or potential impact on, the agriculture industry. This is a climate bill for the whole of the North, across all sectors: industry, infrastructure, travel, and agriculture, transport, etc. And I mean, I have listened to a lot of the stuff you've said this morning, and I agree with a lot. I mean, Sinn Féin, for example, are fully supportive of a just transition to ensure that whatever sectors there's negative impact on all sectors, including agriculture. And I've listened to you about the issue of the Climate Commissioner, and to be quite frank, I actually think you have picked up the role of the Climate Commissioner wrong. The Climate Commissioner is there to offer advice and produce reports. As Claire has pointed out, the accountability of this bill will be with MLAs. I would have thought, and I'd like to ask this question, and as I say, I will allow William in again. Given all of the stuff that you have said this morning, and given all of the concerns that you have had for, in your view, potential impacts, bearing in mind that there's not a single target in this bill with regard to agriculture. So, I mean, I'll be looking forward to see KPMG's report and what it's based on, because this bill doesn't contain any target for the agriculture. And I have asked, and Claire has asked, and I'm not sure we've actually got an answer. The only target actually that exists around agriculture is from the CCC, where they've talked about a 42% reduction in methane. So I haven't seen the Minister's bill. I don't know what's contained in this, but I do know what's contained in the private member's bill is carbon action plans, where 5 yearly reports will come to the Assembly, and MLAs who will be accountable to rural communities and elsewhere will get to discuss and decide on advice from the Department of Agriculture what plans over the next 5 years and targets are produced on the best available science at that time for the agriculture industry. So, I mean, I do think that we need to keep this conversation based on the reality of what's in the bill and not about scaremongering about what's not in the bill. So I would be interested to see your view on what you as an industry think could be the benefits from the 5 yearly carbon action plans and the accountability of the Assembly in terms of producing those targets.
Thanks, but I can't let this go. Your target is set net zero by 2045.
Not for agriculture. You know, I mean, we're talking about targets for carbon for the. No, we haven't produced a target for any of the sectors yet in this bill.
Well, KPMG are looking at getting net zero for agriculture by 2045. And those are the figures they come up. They're not made up with the UFU to scaremonger or anything else. An 85% reduction in ruminant livestock. Now, I know, Philip, you come from a local area, local to myself, and can you imagine the devastation that would cause to your local area? And I can tell you, you know, the whole rural landscape would be devastated. And I don't back down from saying that. You know, if we go in that trajectory, that's what will happen, and it will happen in the marginal land and the hill land that I farm first. So, you know, I'm not backing down on the claims I make there on figures that are not made up by the UFU, but shocked us in the UFU, but came from KPMG. David, do you want to pick up?
Well, I suppose just on the point, Philip, you make about, you know, that you will be listening to DAERA and the advice that DAERA would bring. I mean, sadly, and this is a sad reflection for us as an organisation, that advice from DAERA to date has not been listened to. So therefore, you know, it doesn't give, and I said this in a very open statement that I made, there is no confidence among the agricultural community in relation to this private members bill. That is why so many of our members wrote, phoned and contacted their MLAs with the concerns that they had. And look, I've been on radio interviews with the chair of the Climate Coalition who has said it's lies and scaremongering. I want to state as fact, we're not involved in lies and scaremongering. We're bringing forward the facts of what the implications of all of this will be for Northern Ireland, for our economy, and quite frankly, if those within, I suppose, the proposers of that bill and supporters of that bill have not to date listened to that DAERA advice, then it doesn't give us confidence that that will happen going forward.
William, I mean, you know, you've recognised that this is an evolving situation. You know, so technology will come into being that currently isn't. I mean, you've actually said in the previous question that you have actually identified and given advice to the CCC that they weren't aware of. You know, so you know this is going to be an evolving situation, and that's why I'm interested in your views on the 5 yearly carbon plans, because you know some of the heavy lifting in the first number of years aren't going to be taken up by agriculture. You know, which will allow time for preparation for new technology, for new science, and for greater measurements.
Yes, certainly, and we hope that science will evolve. Certainly, you know, that's going to be our saviour. But how do you create a policy on something that might be or hopefully will be or anything else? I want to bring Aileen in on that point.
Yeah, I mean, that's the difficulty, Philip. We are being told by the scientists that with the known technologies and mitigation measures, it is nowhere near enough to get us to a net zero target for by 2045 or even 2050. Yes, science will evolve, but we need time and we need room to allow that science to evolve with the trajectory that we would need to have to hit the 2045 target. we would have to take action sooner and harder, and that will obviously have the consequences, huge consequences for agriculture community. And I just want to add to that, my job within the union is to present our members with facts, to set out both sides of the argument so that they can take a policy position based on the evidence that's in front of them. It would be a lot easier for us to just go along with what's on the private members bill. There'd be no hassle, there'd be no criticism, we wouldn't have to do all these radio interviews. But we've tried to look for light at the end of the 2045 tunnel. But what I see is a train coming down the line. And it's not possible, it's not fair, and it will have massive consequences. So I think for the sake of farming families, we are really urging you to listen to what we're telling you, to take the advice that you've been given, and to do the right thing when it comes to this with the targets that are being looked at.
Okay, and the chair's back, so I appreciate that, and the conversation will certainly evolve, and the engagement is good. So I interrupted William, so he can come back and finish this.
Keep moving. Go ahead,
for me, I hope that common sense prevails in this. That, irrespective of what some MLAs do say, the Climate Change Committee said that under every scenario that they looked at, it was not possible for Northern Ireland to reach net zero by 2050. Under every scenario that they looked at. So given that advice, and also given the reality that even we did go, that Northern Ireland did go for the private members bill, the difference would only be in the UK as a whole in emissions would only be 0.73%. So we decimate our industries to achieve practically nothing. That does not make common sense, and I hope our MLAs don't bury their head in the sand and listen to expert advice.
Okay, right. Thanks for that, William. Folks, I'm going to have to move on because we have Professor Thorne and Professor Jackson waiting. And I want to thank you, Aileen, Victor, and David, for your evidence session this morning and for your wide-ranging comments. Thanks very, very much for that. And we'll be seeing and hearing from you, no doubt, on this issue and on a whole range of issues in the time ahead. So thank you very much.
And just before I go, could I repeat our invitation for you as MLAs on the DERA committee to come out to farm to see some of the good work we are doing. I think we're setting up a date up for some date in August to a farm in the direction of Jessica Pollock, and I would encourage you all to try to make an effort to get out there to see what is happening on Northern Ireland farms. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Okay, folks, take care now. Thank you, members. Okay, members, I'm going to just jump on. We can come back and we can do the other two items after, but with Professor Thorne waiting here, we need to keep our questions and stuff concise because we have two more oral evidence sessions here. So we have, okay, members. Item number 11, oral evidence session from Professor Peter Thorne. I want to refer to the written briefing from Professor Thorne at page 55 and welcome Professor Thorne by Starleaf. You're very welcome. And I want to apologise in advance, we're running a bit over time this morning, so thank you very much for your indulgence, Professor Thorne.
Okay, thank you. So I have provided written input. Given that you're behind time, I won't spend a long time on it. Just by way of background, I'm from England originally. I work at Maynooth University as the director of the Icarus Climate Research Units in the Republic. And I would just start by saying that the basic science is clear. We have warmed the climate. It's indisputably down to us. We're currently about 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial. The part that is due to us is irretrievably greenhouse gases. So we have a problem. We know we've got that problem. I'm a physical climate scientist. That's the bit I can tell you. What I can't tell you is how to solve it. I have looked at the bill, and I have been involved through the Citizens' Assembly and through various other activities in the Republic, through the Oireachtas Joint Committee, and latterly the Climate Change Advisory Council in this area. Looking at the bill as written, it's not clear to me that it covers all three pillars of what I consider necessary climate governance, which are climate needs to be an all-of-government problem. So it needs to be led from the centre. It needs to then have an independent committee, which may be yourselves, who on a sustained basis are fundamentally holding departments, ministers' feet proverbially to the fire. And then it needs the independent advisory, which I see a lot of in the legislation. So it's really those first two aspects that I don't see strongly in the proposed legislation. I don't see how this is done at an all-of-government level, and I don't see how there is a role for an independent committee that can keep people to account. I think the calling of climate emergency is relevant, but calling a climate emergency in and of itself is nice words. It sharpens minds, but it needs to be followed by action. Looking at the targets as they're given, they're appropriate, they're consistent with the UK Climate Change Committee, they're consistent with the current IPCC. The one caveat I would have is that there is a whole new suite of Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports coming out over the next 18 months, and that might well change what happens, what that advice is. The Climate Action Plan, I had a number of specific queries on it. I find it particularly laudable that the biodiversity and land management aspects are in there. We must recognise that climate change is not the only crisis we are facing. We are facing fundamentally, both at a global level and on the island of Ireland, a biodiversity crisis in addition. The legislation is very strong on mitigation. It has much less to say on adaptation. We already live in a changed world. The flooding that you saw in Derry and Donegal back 3 summers ago, that is indicative of the kind of change that we will have to look at. Sea levels will continue to rise, so that's key. And the just transition is key, and the farming community, but not just the farming community, need to be protected in taking this through. But we cannot escape from the fact that ultimately every greenhouse gas molecule we emit, be it from fossil fuels, from biogenic sources, is adding to the problem. We see just this week in Canada how severe that problem might be becoming, and we absolutely need to take action. So I think I'll leave my opening remarks there to try and catch you up some time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Thorne, and again, apologies for running a bit over, and thanking you for your indulgence of staying with us on this here. Professor, I suppose. Well, maybe I'll ask you. You do have a very. I've been looking at your resume or your background. You have a very strong background in environmental and climate science. If you could set legislation to tackle climate change here in Ireland, north and south, what targets would you set?
So the target would have to be commensurate with the science. If we've seen already at 1.2 degrees what the impacts of that are upon the climate system, upon people fundamentally. We absolutely should aspire to the Paris climate goal, and that climate goal is to keep temperatures below 2 degrees and aspire to keep them below 1.5 degrees. To do that does require, as is noted by the special report on 1.5 degrees from IPCC, effectively getting to net zero by 2050 globally. And in terms of both historical responsibility, but also capabilities, countries such as the UK and Ireland should be aiming to be not just net zero, but net negative. We should actually be aiming to draw down greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide, in the longer term. But net zero by 2050 is a reasonable goal, commensurate with the science and commensurate with globally ambition to keep well below 2 degrees centigrade.
And in your briefing note, Professor Thorne, you made reference to that there are clear codependencies with the UK-wide legislation and the UK CCC, and this creates a complicated line of governance. Could you just elaborate on that further, and how do you think it could be made less complicated?
So it's very hard to see how it's made less complicated. I mean, in the Republic of Ireland, we're in a very fortunate position in that we have absolute competence. Clearly, in Northern Ireland, that's far more complicated. You are already having to observe UK-wide climate change legislation, and you already are under the auspices of the UK Climate Change Committee. And it would be retrograde to actually remove those obligations. So you will have whatever you do as an assembly, whatever you do as a devolved arm of the UK, needs to be commensurate with the UK-wide legislation and the UK-wide bodies that have been set up. And that's where I see it's far more complicated for you than it would be for us in the Republic of Ireland, where there is no such codependency.
And then again, that flags up the challenge, because being on the same, whatever about the constitutional situation and the jurisdiction situation here, we are on a simple island, the same island, and the climate doesn't know any boundaries. So, would you see an importance of, aligning or harmonising with what's going on in the south?
I absolutely think that the climate is one area where we need to forget our differences. As you said, climate does not observe geopolitical boundaries. It doesn't care that there's a border on the island of Ireland. So we do need to work together at numerous levels, at industry level, at civil society level, in terms of things as basic as research into the problem and the solutions. We should be tackling this on an all-island basis. That's the only way that it makes sense to try to tackle this problem and the linked problem of biodiversity.
Perfect. Thank you, Professor. William?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and can thank you for your presentation. In relation to the Climate Change Committee, they have made recommendations for 4 regions of the UK. They made recommendations for Northern Ireland to reduce emissions by 82% by 2050. In doing that, it ensured that the whole of the UK reached net zero by 2050. What's your view on that? Would you agree with the Climate Change Committee?
I would have no reason to disagree with the Climate Change Committee in their UK-wide basis of reaching net zero. Of course, as I said earlier, that's a great yardstick for 2045, 2050. If we want to think about a livable climate for future generations, then UK and Ireland probably need to aspire to be net negative in the longer term, but net zero is hard enough. And yes, you can't. Not everyone is going to pull equally. Not all sectors can act as quickly, and there are. So yes, differentiated targets are a reasonable basis.
Thank you.
And Professor, you also mentioned that in your briefing note that the proposed legislation is largely silent on adaptation and needs strengthened on the issue of the just transition. Could you elaborate on how you think this proposed legislation could be strengthened to address the issue of climate adaptation and just transition?
So the Climate Commissioner should have a designated authority to advise on climate adaptation. But even if we are wildly successful both nationally in the UK and in Ireland, and even globally in reducing emissions. We're going to see further warming. That further warming will mean more extreme weather of the type that we have seen in recent years, and our infrastructure is not set up for it on a kind of fundamental level, and that's from the level of individual homeowners through large-scale building infrastructure, through the built environment more generally, transport, etc. We need to plan and be climate smart and climate resilient, and that means we need to look again at our infrastructure and our investment in infrastructure. There is no point in building a hospital today for today's climate if we know that climate is going to change. It is a false saving to build today's climate if the building is intended to last till 2100 and we know it's going to be half a degree warmer in summer, and we're going to need to retrofit expensively down the line. So it's about embedding climate decision making into all aspects of policy, and it's not just chasing greenhouse gas reductions. And adaptation is perennially the poor cousin of climate change policy. We're chasing very, very hard greenhouse gas reductions, quite rightly so, but we're not recognising that we need to plan for both the fact that the climate has already changed, but also, more importantly, that it will continue to change.
Thank you. Rosemary? Rosemary?
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. Just one question. In your climate action plan, you refer to, does net zero carbon mean net zero carbon dioxide or net zero GHG emissions? And you talk about the distinction is important. Can you elaborate on that, please?
So as I think you heard from the last set of witnesses, not all greenhouse gases are equal.
Yeah.
So the greenhouse warming potential, either GWP 100, their 100-year effective radiative forcing, or GWP star, their more immediate forcing, does differ. And if we're just talking about net carbon being carbon dioxide, and we're not bothering about methane, not bothering about N2O, not bothering about the halogenated gases, the synthetic gases, reaching net zero carbon dioxide will not lead to a net zero climate impact if we're allowing methane, N2O, CFCs, etc. to continue to increase. So the climate system cares about the radiative imbalance. It doesn't care whether that radiative imbalance fundamentally arises from a carbon dioxide molecule, a methane molecule, a nitrous oxide molecule, or anything else. If we're going to stabilise the climate system, we need to fundamentally get to a net greenhouse gas of zero. That buys us stabilisation. If we want to actually start to move climate back towards what it was, we need to start removing greenhouse gases, and that's where you get into net negative.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay then, Professor Thorne, well, thank you very much for attending here this afternoon. Your briefing was very helpful and informative, both your written and your oral contributions. So I want to thank you very much for that there. And we will hopefully hear from you again. So thank you, Professor Thorne. Okay, thank you. Members, we're going to move round now to the next item on the agenda, which is item 12, and we're going to have an oral evidence session on the climate change bill from Dr. Andrew Jackson. I want to refer to the briefing paper from Dr. Jackson, which has been tabled. I want to welcome Dr. Jackson by Starleaf and invite him to take up to 10 minutes to brief the committee, and then members will ask some questions. So you're very welcome, Dr. Jackson. Is that?
Many thanks.
Okay.
So in the interest of time, what I propose to do is not to deliver my full opening statement, which you have in writing, but I'll deliver part of that, and I'll give an indication of the parts I'm not covering, and maybe I'll try to work in that material in response to any questions you may have. So thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee, for inviting me today. I'm an assistant professor of environmental law at UCD in Dublin and a practicing solicitor with qualifications in law and environmental science. I've published recently in the fields of climate law and biodiversity law, including a chapter on the history of Irish climate law that appears in a recent edited book on national climate acts. My previous roles include working for the UK Government's Department for Environment, DEFRA in London, where I provided legal advice, drafted legislation and defended litigation. I've litigated cases for many years before the Irish, English and EU courts. Recently, I acted for Friends of the Irish Environment in a case known as Climate Case Ireland, in which the Supreme Court of Ireland in July 2020 quashed the Irish Government's National Mitigation Plan 2017. The perspectives I offer on the climate change bill are therefore as an academic, as a former drafter of legislation, and as a litigator. By way of context to the committee's scrutiny of the bill, it's important first to consider what the international scientific consensus tells us about climate change and biodiversity loss. Because, as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and its biodiversity equivalent, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, concluded in a joint report published last month, neither biodiversity loss nor climate change will be successfully resolved unless both are tackled together. In this regard, it's important to emphasise that the summaries for policymakers of IPCC and IPBES reports are explicitly agreed line by the governments that form part of those bodies, including the UK government. This gives these reports a special status. They represent the international scientific consensus that has been explicitly endorsed by governments, including the UK's. In the summary for policymakers of its 2019 Global Assessment Report, IPBES states, goals for conserving and sustainably using nature and achieving sustainability cannot be met by current trajectories, and goals for 2030 and beyond may only be achieved through transformative changes across economic, social, political and technological factors. Transformative change is defined by IPBES as a fundamental system-wide reorganisation across technological, economic and social factors, including paradigms, goals and values. In other words, amongst the questions properly before the committee in its scrutiny of any climate bill such as this must be, will the bill help to achieve transformative change in this sense? Because anything less will not do, according to IPBES and the UK government. In turn, in the summary for policymakers of its 2018 special report on 1.5 degrees Celsius, the IPCC stated, in model pathways with no or limited overshoot of 1.5 degrees, global net anthropogenic CO2 emissions decline by about 45% from 2010 levels by 2030, reaching net zero around 2050. Modelled pathways that limit global warming to 1.5 degrees with no or limited overshoot involve deep reductions in emissions of methane and black carbon, 35% or more of both by 2050 relative to 2010. Importantly, these are global averages. Developed country parties to the Paris Agreement, such as the UK, are explicitly required to take the lead, i.e. to do more than the global average, and to adopt measures that represent the party's highest possible ambition. As things stand, according to the IPCC, the world had in 2018 a remaining forever carbon budget of 420 gigatons of CO2 for a 66% probability of limiting heating to 1.5 degrees, and the remaining budget is being depleted by current emissions of about 42 gigatons of CO2 per year. In other words, as at 2018, we had just 10 years left of current global emissions before the forever carbon budget for 1.5 degrees is entirely used up. Very significantly, as well as being global averages, these IPCC figures assume the deployment post-2050 of massive-scale CO2 removal, or negative emissions technologies, that are subject to multiple feasibility and sustainability constraints according to the IPCC. In other words, the IPCC does not say that it is possible to achieve negative emissions at the required scale, or even that the necessary technologies exist, but rather produces its emission reduction trajectories on the assumption that negative emissions of a particular magnitude will be required and achieved. However, the world currently has no plan for this, and it would, in my view, be deeply unjust for us to bestow this legacy on our children in order that we can continue to emit excessive greenhouse gases today. This would be the very essence of so-called predatory delay. As Professor Kevin Anderson and colleagues noted in a recent peer-reviewed paper in Climate Policy, if instead the mitigation agenda of developed country parties is determined without reliance on highly speculative, planetary scale negative emissions technologies, and with genuine regard for equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, the necessary rates of mitigation increase markedly. In the case of the UK, the carbon budgets underpinning mitigation policy are halved, the immediate mitigation rate is increased to over 10% per annum, and the time to deliver a fully decarbonised energy system is brought forward to 2035 to 2040. The UK's current emissions pathway therefore implies a carbon budget of at least a factor of 2 greater than its fair contribution to delivering on the Paris Agreement's commitment. It's important to note that Professor Anderson's date of 2035 to 2040 for total decarbonisation is based on a global carbon budget that gives only a 33% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees. A better chance implies an even smaller budget, even steeper mitigation, and even earlier decarbonisation. Thus, in addition to asking whether the climate change bill will help to achieve transformative change, in my view, the committee faces a second vital question. Does the climate change bill represent Northern Ireland's highest possible ambition, ignoring highly speculative negative emissions technologies? Because again, anything less will not do. Regarding the bill itself then, the first thing I would say is that it's a very welcome development to see a domestic framework climate law proposed in Northern Ireland. It's very positive too, I think, that the bill seeks to plan not only for greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but also for water quality, soil quality and biodiversity, recognising that action on climate change requires action on these matters too. To further reflect this fact, to my mind, it would be good to see the declaration in section 1 of the bill extended to refer to the climate and biodiversity emergency. In other words, not just the climate emergency, but climate and biodiversity. Now, the remainder of my opening statement in writing, which I understand will be made available on your website in due course, covers some issues that I saw were discussed in previous sessions, including the net zero target and what the appropriate target should be for Northern Ireland in the bill. Leading on from that, I also consider the fact that Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland may end up having different targets for 2050 and what that may mean and what ought maybe to be done about that. And then I consider some specific points about the bill, including whether it would be a good idea to include within the bill an interim target or targets en route to total decarbonisation by 2045. I look at climate justice and just transition and how those principles might be more fully enshrined within the bill. I consider reporting obligations and make a suggestion that perhaps the proposed Climate Commissioner could be tasked with reporting very regularly on whether Northern Ireland's current plans, in other words, its ultimate decarbonisation year, the ambition in its climate action plan, and so on, still represent the country's highest possible ambition. And I recommend that that be done monthly. And I might just make the point here, I've said, while some might consider this excessive, we know from government's responses to COVID-19 what an emergency response looks like. It means daily briefings by public health experts, amongst other things. Given that the climate and biodiversity emergency represents an unprecedented public health emergency, and indeed an existential threat to our civilization, for which there is no vaccine, monthly reporting on Northern Ireland's climate ambition would, in my view, be not only appropriate but necessary. I conclude by making some suggestions as to how legal accountability generally might be beefed up in the climate change bill. And in ultimate conclusion, I say, to stand a chance of limiting heating to 1.5 degrees, Northern Ireland's emissions need to fall very deeply, very rapidly, starting immediately. The Assembly therefore has just one shot at getting this legislation right. We know that robust framework climate laws enable effective action, and we know how such laws are designed. I wish the committee every success in its work. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Jackson, and for your written briefing as well. Philip, you want to come in there?
Yep, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I mean, just a couple of points very, very quickly. I mean, you've referenced probably, or in your view, the need maybe to include the biodiversity crisis in greater detail. I think that was something that Professor Thorne had mentioned in his presentation earlier on. Personally, I think that's welcome. I mean, your views on the just transition and climate justice. I mean, my party supports a just transition and climate justice and a just transition committee, and it was part of the discussion. I know with some of the bill architects that they felt that this bill did contain the principles lifted from the Scottish Act in terms of just transition, although it doesn't mention specifically. So you're saying that it needs to go further than currently exists to do justice to a just transition, and specifically mention that. And then just finally, in terms of the interim targets, I mean, I know you've made some suggestions. Maybe there you could elaborate on the importance of that and where you would set those targets and what year, and then maybe just again emphasise the point about this with our previous this being an island and it is. I mean, you're suggesting that the south nearly needs to go more ambitious and head for the 2045, so that we have some kind of all Ireland cooperation rather than us go the other way. Is that, I mean, I hope I'm picking you up right in those points.
Thanks very much for the question. I'll take them in turn. So first, on climate justice and just transition, yes, I'm suggesting exactly what you said, which is that the bill, I think, needs to go a little bit further. And I think the Scottish Act is a very good exemplar, and I suppose I say that as a lawyer, not as a Scottish person, if you know what I mean. Not simply endorsing it because it's Scottish. What I said about that in my written evidence was this: the term climate justice does not currently appear in the bill. An appropriate body could, for example, be required to report on how and the extent to which the principle to be defined in the bill, and then I refer to the provision of Scotland's Act that defines climate justice, has been taken into account in setting and reviewing the net zero target date, any interim targets that might be included, carbon budgets, nitrogen budgets, climate action plans, and so on. And then similarly, there's no reference in the bill to the concept of a just transition, although the bill does contain just transition related concepts in section 3, amongst other places. But if you contrast that with Scotland's Act, the Scottish Act sets out detailed just transition principles in section 35C, and then requires the Scottish Government to explain the extent to which its climate plans take account of these principles and the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think for me, the Scottish Act is one of the best examples internationally of a well-designed piece of national framework climate legislation. And that's borne out on the ground if you look at Scotland's performance in terms of reducing emissions.
Sorry
so I think it would be important to build explicitly into the fabric of the bill in Northern Ireland. What do we mean by climate justice? What do we mean by just transition? And to impose specific obligations on institutions in Northern Ireland to take account of those things in developing plans, thinking about how targets ought to change, and so on.
And sorry, to interrupt you before you answer the final point. I mean, I don't know if you heard our previous discussion with the UFU, but if the principles were inserted into the bill as you're suggesting, would that some way go, or would that address some of the concerns of specific sectors in terms of how targets might impact their industry in terms of workers or revenue, etc.?
Well, I didn't hear your previous discussion, but if we go to, let me just go to the Scottish Act, the Just Transition Principles, which are the importance of taking action to reduce Scottish emissions in a way which supports environmentally and socially sustainable jobs, supports low carbon investment in infrastructure, develops and maintains social consensus through engagement with workers, trade unions, communities, NGOs, representatives of the interests of business and industry, and such other persons as Scottish ministers consider appropriate, creates decent, fair and high value work in a way which does not negatively affect the current workforce and overall economy, contributes to resource efficient and sustainable economic approaches which help to address inequality and poverty. So I don't think the just transition principles would put a brake on transformative change, the transformative change that's needed. But what they do in the way that legally they've been woven into the fabric of the Scottish Act is they ensure when the Scottish Government is acting, those very important matters are front and centre of their minds. So I think that's how I would answer your question.
Yep, thank you. That's brilliant.
Okay, thank you for that. Claire? There?
Hi, Chair, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And thank you very much for that presentation. Thanks for speaking with us today. And thanks for all your work to date so far as well. I do follow a lot of the stuff that you produce, and it wouldn't be the first time that I've been jealous of Scotland and how far they are ahead on many issues. But I maybe want to ask you about the importance of political will when it comes to establishing whether or not targets are credible. I know that you're using the Scottish Bill as a Scottish Act as a good example, and I'm just sort of, that's why the question's coming into my head. You know, was there political consensus, and if there is the political will to achieve a target, is it more important that the political system builds the pathways to achieving that, or whether we just focus on debatable science within sectors?
It's a very good question, thank you. I'm not sure I'm best placed to answer it, to be honest, in the sense that, and maybe a way to explain it is to say, when we took the case against the Irish government in the Supreme Court, what we always had to be very careful to emphasise was that we weren't trying to prescribe any particular policy outcome. We were simply making an argument that this is what the science says. Here is the link that we say exists between the agreed science and human rights, and that then passes to government and to Parliament to take the necessary political decisions, making the trade-offs between sectors that are a matter for the political sphere. But I mean, absolutely, I think it's very important that political consensus is developed both within the legislature, but also very importantly within the broader community. And that's one of the discussions we had around Ireland's proposed climate bill was, how do you beef up public participation in the development of plans and so on? And that would be highly relevant if you follow the current model of your bill, which sees the climate action plans setting the targets. You know, that might be an interesting area to explore. I know you have public participation obligations already built into the bill, but building that consensus around, okay, this is what the science says, this is how urgent and serious it is that we take action. And that's a process that has worked well in the Republic of Ireland via the Citizens' Assembly process. You know, this process of selecting 100 individuals, sort of randomly selected to be broadly representative of life, who then consider some of the most important issues facing our society, one of which was climate change. They hear expert evidence, they then make reports to a committee like your own, and that then in turn produced a report to government. That has been a model that has worked well in Ireland, and is precisely doing what you're saying is necessary, is trying to build the political consensus for the necessary action. But I suppose I don't see, what I see my role as a lawyer, sort of embedded in the climate science, is to say, well, this is what the science says is necessary. I say that that links to legal obligations, such as human rights obligations. I don't say how this should be achieved, and what trade-offs should be made and what sectors should be brought and so on. That's not my job, that's someone else's job.
Okay.
Okay, listen, there's a lot of feedback there, so enough, and thank you for your submission. It's been very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Claire, thank you. William?
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. In relation to net zero in Northern Ireland, we had a climate change committee set up in the UK to look at the 4 regions of the UK: England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Now, it was much easier for Scotland to reach net zero because of a much smaller livestock sector in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is a very high level of livestock sector, very intensive. So they've made a recommendation that Northern Ireland reaches 82% by 2050, which in turn means that the UK reaches net zero. We have an advantage being part of the UK that by Northern Ireland reaching 82% by 2050, it ensures that the UK as a whole reaches net zero. What's your view on that?
Well, it's sort of multi-layered, I suppose. My first point would be to say I think net zero by 2050 is in short order going to look insufficient for the United Kingdom, for the European Union, and so on. So that would be my starting point. I'd say whatever Northern Ireland's contribution is within the United Kingdom's overall target is insufficient for the reasons that I've mentioned. It's predicated on massive negative emissions for which there is no plan. On the question of the CCC's advice, I would tend towards the analysis of Northern Ireland Environment Link, which I know gave evidence before the committee on the 11th of June. In other words, the figure of greenhouse gas reductions of at least 82% is a minimum. It's a floor, not a ceiling, and it's a recommendation which can be tightened. And as the CCC noted in its 6th carbon budget report, there's no purely technical reason why net zero is not possible in Northern Ireland. And while the CCC's letter to Minister Poots from April stated, our assessment is that a net zero target covering all greenhouse gases cannot credibly be set for Northern Ireland at this time, I think that statement has to be considered as NIEL argued in the context of another statement by the CCC in its 2019 report that a net zero greenhouse gas target is not credible unless policy is ramped up significantly. So to say that a net zero target covering all greenhouse gases can't credibly be set for Northern Ireland sounds to me like a judgment of what is deemed politically feasible rather than what is scientifically or technically achievable. And it's hard for me to see how such a judgment fits with the highest possible ambition requirement of the Paris Agreement. And I might make an additional point, if I may, because that's an argument made already before the committee. This point hasn't been made, I think, which is if you consider a separate passage from the CCC's letter to Minister Poots, which says the reduction of at least 82% in all greenhouse gases by 2050 would require Northern Ireland to reach net zero CO2 emissions by 2050, as well as significantly reducing emissions of other greenhouse gases, including methane. With the footnote, in our balanced pathway, methane emissions in Northern Ireland fall by 42% from 2020 to 2050. So this CCC recommendation is broadly comparable to the IPCC advice that I read out at the start of my opening statement. In other words, on global average net zero CO2 emissions by 2050 and a reduction of 35% or more in methane by 2050 compared to 2010. Now, as a developed party with amongst the highest per capita emissions in the world, Northern Ireland clearly, I think, should be doing much more than the global average in terms of its fair share contribution. And as I've already indicated, once we exclude speculative CO2 removal technologies, as I think we must, this implies much more rapid mitigation and much earlier decarbonisation than is currently envisaged. And all of that, I say, points towards selecting for the bill as early a decarbonisation date as possible. So if the choice is 2050 or 2045, in my view, clearly 2045 is preferable as a matter of climate science and climate justice. And if we look to other European countries, for example, Austria 2040, Finland 2035, Iceland 2040, Norway 2030 with offsets, Sweden 2045. So I would say, as I opened my remarks by saying, I think the UK's and the EU's current 2050 targets are going to need to be brought forward soon, and perhaps even as soon as after the IPCC's sixth assessment report is published this year and next.
The Climate Change Committee made fairly clear and stark recommendations given the intensive livestock sector we have in Northern Ireland. They did say in one paragraph that under every scenario that they looked at, Northern Ireland could not reach net zero by 2050, in every scenario that they looked at. So given that, that's why they made the recommendation they did. In doing that, they do, as I say, reach net zero by 2050. So you disagree with the Climate Change Committee report? Is that what you say?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All the other regions of the UK are happy with it and are taking it on board. The Republic of Ireland, then, what's their recommendations?
The Republic of Ireland, of course, is following the European Union target, which is also net zero by 2050. But again, I would make the same criticism of the European Union's 2050 target, or 2050 decarbonisation year.
You're saying they have the same target as the UK then, is that right?
The European Union as a whole has a 2050 net zero. Ireland is setting in its climate amendment bill a 2050 climate neutrality goal. But one point that is important to emphasise, which I make in my written submission, is the 2050 endpoint is just a snapshot. Equally, if not more important, is the pathway that's followed between now and the ultimate decarbonisation year, because of course what matters is cumulative emissions and the carbon budget over that entire period. If we look at what Ireland is planning to enshrine in its national legislation, is looking to reduce its emissions by 51% by 2030 compared to the 2018 level. Now, I have some concerns with how that provision is drafted in Irish law, but that represents the second most ambitious target globally after Denmark's in terms of action over the next 10 years. So if we're talking about, does it make sense for Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland to align targets and so on, it's not simply a matter of comparing, 2050 versus 2045 or 82% by 2050 or whatever. We have to consider what is the pathway that is being recommended, what is the pathway that is likely to be followed. And it's certainly the case that Ireland now, to be clear, from a starting point in Ireland in which emissions have risen between 1990 and 2020, Ireland is planning an ambitious emissions reduction over the next decade. In Northern Ireland, I know you've reduced emissions over that period, so the starting point may be slightly different. But my broader point is, it's not enough just to look at the end point. We need to consider what the pathway and the budget is over the period.
I would have thought the end point was the most important point, but that's maybe only me. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And a last point from Claire before we move on. Claire? Claire?
Yep. Hi. Thanks very much for allowing me back in. There's really interesting stuff there, and I know that there's a commentary around the UK's reliance on what's deemed as highly speculative negative emissions technology, and given the use of carbon capture and storage technology, and it's not proven at scale, how would you advise that carbon budgets are designed to ensure that net zero is reached, regardless of whether or not CCS technology is widely rolled out in the future?
Well, I think I've cited, and I should say in response to the previous question too, I'm not the only one by any means who is critical of net zero by 2050 targets and the reliance on, massive speculative future removal from the atmosphere. And if you look at the IPCC reports and the different scenarios, and you see the level of CO2 removal that's planned in those scenarios, it's quite extraordinary. And the two sort of leading ideas are, direct air capture, kind of power plants that actually suck carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which again is not something that's being done at scale at the moment. And then, as you said, carbon capture and storage. But there's another addition at the start of that that's important when we talk about negative emissions, is bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. So in other words, we grow trees, forests, we plant forests, and then we burn that biomass in power plants and capture the carbon using CCS technology, and that's the negative emissions part. And I know a lot of the focus both in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland has been on what are the impacts or projected impacts on the agricultural sector of acting. And what maybe is not given the same consideration is what are the impacts of not acting. The less we do to reduce emissions, the more we have to rely on future negative emissions technologies to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Even at the moment, on the basis of the UK government's plans and the Irish government plans, we need to do massive CO2 removal, including massive bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. That means massive land use change, huge quantities of land given over to forestry planting to feed bioenergy power plants with carbon capture and storage. Now, we all know that it takes time for forests to establish. I would ask the committee to consider where is the planning for that to happen at the scale necessary. What would that mean for Northern Ireland's land use change? What would it mean for the rest of the United Kingdom in terms of land use change? Where are these enormous forests going to be planted to feed bioenergy, carbon capture and storage plants? And that is, the previous questioner seemed surprised that I disagreed with the CCC. I'm not the only one, and maybe, the committee could ask the CCC to explain in the Northern Irish context, in the UK context, in the global context, what's the plan now for the scale of negative emissions? How can we justifiably base our decisions on emissions reductions now on a punt that places the burden, that passes the baton to our kids and says, we've had a great time, and by the way, we've planned for you to invent a unicorn, and we hope you can do that because you're going to need to do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Claire. Okay, Dr. Jackson, I want to thank you very much for your evidence this afternoon, and that was very helpful and very informative. And can I seek agreement to publish Dr. Jackson's briefing paper on the committee's webpage? Great. Okay, thank you, Dr. Jackson, and hopefully we'll hear from you again. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Take care, Dr. Jackson. Bye now. Okay, members. Okay, I'm going to go back to resume where there's a number of written briefings which I skipped forward because we had to make up for some time. And I want to go back to item number 6. That's an SL1, the Agriculture Student Fees Amendment Regulations NA 2021. The briefing's at page 27. These will amend the Agriculture Act student fees regulations, which sets the level of fees payable for courses of higher education delivered at Caffrey. They were first considered by the committee the 6th of May and 6th of May 2021. However, the examiner statutories recommend the definitions of for EU settlement scheme pre-settled status and settled status be incorporated. These regulations before us today have since been amended to take account of the comments by the ESR, are subject to a negative resolution with an anticipated date for coming to operation on the 2nd of August. I just want to, just in light of, I'm reading it in this in a little bit more detail, and in light of the changes to settlement status that came in last night, I have to say I'm concerned about this here, and again it's a consequence of us leaving the EU, that the international students, basically with this SR, that will be updated to include new students in the EU have not obtained pre-settled or settled status. Their tuition fees will be equivalent to £9,000 per academic year, whereas EU students who have the settled status, they will have the same fees as other students here of £1,785. Now, I know it doesn't affect a lot of students, but I'm just fearful that this SR before us could act as a barrier for future students from other parts of the EU coming here to study. And we know the reliance, particularly in the agri-food sector, of people coming from other parts of the world to work here, and indeed our vets as well. So it's just something that probably we can't change it because it's coming as from negative resolution under powers derived from the British Agricultural Act. But it's something that I just want to highlight as something that I think is regrettable and I'm fearful of. Members, any comments on this SR? No. Okay, members, just get my thing here. Okay, members, okay to note this here? Okay. Okay. Item number 7. Animals records and identification movements regulations NI 2021. The department hasn't submitted any papers for this, so we'll defer it. And same with the equine identification regulations. The department hasn't got their papers in, so we'll defer it as well. Item 9 is the written briefing. The direct payments to farmers, controls and checks amendment coronavirus regulations NI 2021. Written briefing at page 40. The committee last considered these at the meeting on the 16th of June, and we agreed the policy should move to the next stage. The regulations are subject to negative resolution, are expected to come into operation on the 15th of July, and the examiner statutory rules is reported in the regulations and hasn't identified any issues to the rule. If members are content, I'll put the question that the Committee of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs has considered SR 2021-181, the direct payment to farmers controls and checks amendment coronavirus regulations NI 2021, and there's no objection to the rules. Okay. Number 10 is the written briefing SR 2021-182, the waste fees and charges amendment regulations NI 2021. The briefing's at page 47. We considered this at the meeting on the 24th of June. As agreed, the policy moved to the next stage. The examiner statutory rules has identified some queries with these regulations and have been put to departmental colleagues. I can advise members that the examiner intends to have a recommendation on these regulations with the committee at next week's meeting. Okay, members? Okay. Where are we at now? Okay. I'm going to move on now to item number 13 on your agenda, members. It's a written briefing, market surveillance NI regulation 2021. Written briefings in the table packed on the impending introduction of these regulations, which are due to take effect on the 16th of July. They establish a replacement market surveillance scheme from that which was in place under EU law, and They have effect across 3 local departments, ERA, Justice and Economy. With regards to ERA's functions, the regulations set out the investigation, enforcement and penalty powers the department and its armed next bodies will have in respect of undertaking surveillance of manufactured goods moving to and within the EU single market so as to ensure that they are compliant with EU standards. Committee has been asked for any comments or questions that should be drawn to the attention of the Minister before the regulations come into effect. And if members have any comments, you can raise them now, or you can fire the
Chair,
Rosemary. Sorry, Rosemary. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Can I ask, is therefore this is part of the implementation of the protocol in relation to this?
Am I correct in saying, Nick, this is aligning the same safety standards as the EU? Is that right?
Yes, Chair, that's correct. This is one of the statutory instruments being brought forth, Rosemary, under the auspices of the Trading Cooperation Agreement and therefore the protocol. It's to ensure there's alignment of the market surveillance regime that previously was in effect through EU law.
And who brought it forward? Who brought it to us?
It's statutory instrument, so it's being introduced via Westminster, and the committee is being asked for any comments or questions in advance of it coming into effect on the 16th of July.
If you have any comments, you can make them to Nick now, or else you can email in.
You can email them to Nick. That's all right. I'll take a look at it.
Okay.
Certainly.
I'll email them in.
Okay, Rosemary.
Thank
you. Okay.
Yeah.
No problem. Okay, members. 14 is another statutory instrument, the Common Organisation of Markets and Agricultural Products Transitional Arrangements Amendment Regulations 2021. And again, the papers haven't arrived, so this matter has also been deferred. Item number 15 is the written briefing, the NIEA Draft Business Plan 21-22. Again, this has been deferred as the papers haven't been submitted. And there's a written briefing from the Forest Service Draft Business Plan 21-22. It's page 64. The plan includes 8 key targets and 15 supplementary measures to support those targets. Focus on the priority work activity of the agency for 21-22. These are delivery of the 21-22 Forest of Our Future programme to plant 600 hectares of woodland as part of the overall goal to plant 18 million trees by 2030, provide at least 400,000 cubic metres of timber from well-managed forests to customers, and hold independent certification that the management of Dura Forest meets sustainable forestry standards, develop a risk-based inspection framework for plant and plant products, and develop a draft policy framework for plant health controls, develop a forest management planning system to incorporate assessment of carbon implications in all ecosystem services, achieve an income of at least 11 million from all sources, and secure an employee engagement index of at least 60%. If members have any questions on this, you can please forward them to Nick by the close of play today. Number 18 is a marine strategy, updated programme measures. Papers have been submitted, so this matter has also been deferred. Written briefing, EU transition, page 68 of your 88 of your pack. The key points in the briefing are as follows. The UK and the EU have agreed on the management of key shared stocks with fishing until the end of 2021. A full business case outlining options for operation supports will be completed by October 21. Therefore, any necessary building work will not be completed by 2023, subject to an executive approval decision. A controlled stop on building works will remain in place while this work progresses. Associated controlled stop on relevant design work has now ended. Okay. Members, any questions relating to that there written briefing that you have in your pack on the EU and transition? Can I ask that you forward it to Nick by the close of play today? And can I also agreement to publish a written briefing from the department on the committee's webpage? Okay. Members, correspondence, page 96. I want to draw your attention to the following. Correspondence from the department on the publication of the investigation of the effects of COVID-19 restrictions and air quality report for the first half of 2020. Members are asked to consider the findings contained in the report and advise the clerk of any issues they wish to raise with the department. Please, you can raise them now, or you can send them in to Nick by the close of play today. Page 196, corresponds to the department advising that it intends to launch a joint consultation on a policy on managing radioactive substances and nuclear decommissioning, which is expected to commence in the late summer, early autumn. That is across Britain and here, and I think it would be important. Could we seek clarity? I propose we seek clarity from the department because, again, radioactive substances knows no boundaries. So I think it would be worthwhile, if possible, to get some seek engagement on the proposed policy that's been taking place in the South. Okay. Page 200, correspondence from the Department on the consultation and proposed changes to the area best scheme, review of decisions panel. Correspondence advises that the consultation launched the 22nd of June for an 8-week period. The Department will return to the committee with an analysis of consultation responses in due course. It relates to the independent panels issue which we have been considering at length. Page 665, correspondence from NI Sheep Scab Control Group regarding the inclusion of scab control in any future models of agri support. Again, can I seek agreement to write to the department to seek clarity on any plans or strategies for the eradication of scab and sheep? Is that okay? And are members okay with action the rest of the index, the rest of the correspondence suggestion index, page 93? Okay, forward work programme, page 682. The clerk, I want to remind members that advise the clerk of their availability to attend a virtual visit organised by the Area Council on the 8th of July at 1:30 p.m. And can I seek for agreement on the remainder of the forward work programme? Okay. In terms of any of our business, Patsy has asked here if we could get a formal committee update on the status of the Farm Welfare Bill. Patsy, are you here? Patsy, Patsy's still there. Sorry, Patsy, I've seen it on the group. Sorry, Patsy, do you want to come in there on that, Patsy?
All I wanted just was, Chair, am I coming across clear enough there? Okay, aye?
Yes, yes, absolutely, Patsy.
Grand, thank you, Chair, for allowing me to bring that. I just wanted to find out what the status of the Farm Welfare Bill was. I know we got various evidence and various very informative pieces of evidence, both from the department and from RIAS. But there were a number of issues raised in the research stuff, and I'm wondering, did the advocates or the proponents of the Farm Welfare Bill, did they get an opportunity to respond to the issues that were raised in that, written opportunity to respond to the many issues that were raised in that during that formal evidence session?
Okay, have enough to note that. Members, committee, okay, we seek that clarification of the department. Okay.
And I mean, from the research paper, Declan, please, or Chair, the research paper, there were a number of issues that were teased out by research that related to this bill. I'm just wondering, did the proponents of the bill, did they get the opportunity to see those issues and to formally come back and respond to those issues, or were they given that opportunity?
Chair, I'll just come in there. Patsy, yes, we did follow up. That was a few weeks ago after RIAS had given the briefing on the Farm Welfare Bill. And if memory serves me correctly, there was a request in about potential legal advice and other issues raised in that. And we did forward those to RIAS who have looked at them. We have not, as a committee, gone back to the proponents of the bill to write to those formally, but that is certainly something that we could do through a formal correspondence if that was desired.
I think, Chair, that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Because they did go to a lot of bother at their end to bring forward these proposals, and it's only fair that they should be given the opportunity to respond to the issues that were raised in both sessions of evidence that we got. Please.
Okay. Members of any other business that want to raise? See nothing on the WhatsApp group here. Could I just, with the support of the committee, just go back, seeing in relation to June monitoring, a note that there's still some money that had been unallocated this week, 29.7 million capital. Could I propose that we come right back to the department to just revisit that again to see is there any opportunities where we could get a bid for some of that there for investment in rural areas?
I suspect that's capital money, so
yeah,
I'd have to respond in capital money.
That's 29.7 million capital. Okay, I would also want to advise members that the clerk will provide a briefing to the committee next week on the proposed procedural guidance to undertake the scrutiny of the Department's climate change bill if it is referred to this committee after the second stage. Remember, the next meeting will take place on Thursday, the 8th of July at 10 a.m. and will be a hybrid meeting streamed on the Assembly website. And thank you all for your attendance this morning. And I'll go adjourn the meeting. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Senate Chamber, Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound.